Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's always hardest to do an afternoon session, especially after a big lunch, so just bear with me. We've got about 3 hours, which is not really that long of a time for this, although it'll feel like a lifetime to you. First of all, thanks for having me. It's great to come back and see some old friends. I've been coming to this state for a long, long time, and we've done a lot of work here, and it's always great to be able to come back and see that you're still moving forward and trying to do things that are going to be effective. What I want to do today is, for some of you, it's probably just a rehash. I want to talk a little bit about kind of what we know and how we know it. Talk about some of the new things that I think are going on, some important work that we've been doing around, not only around dosage, but around trying to implement some of this work, not only through programs, but through individuals. And not just epics. I know that you know a little bit about epics, and we'll talk about epics because we've been doing that here in Colorado with parole for a while. But we've got a new model. We call it epics for influencers, and we're really trying to identify people in their lives and train them on how to help them. And we've got some pilot studies going on, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. I've been doing this work for a long, long time. I just finished my 37th year at the university, and so I'm a lot closer to the end than I am the beginning, but I'm still excited about it. I'm still motivated to, I think, help the field move forward. So we'll talk about some of that along the way. My work has changed a lot over the years. I used to just kind of evaluate programs. But when you go in and tell somebody that what they're doing isn't likely to be effective, or in some cases you actually did the research and said it wasn't effective, there's often, of course it was always my fault that their programs didn't work, but once they got past that, I always felt it was incumbent on researchers to try to help them become more effective. And so we started early work assessing correctional programs. That led to developing risk assessment and looking at that whole area. We do a lot of work now with curriculums and training. We've got some exciting work that we're doing with the United States Office of the Courts that I hope to be able to bring to the field in a few years. We're developing curriculum for POs, for providers. It's going to be in 5 languages, so if you speak Russian, you'll be able to use it there as well. But I'm excited because I think it'll be more tools to help you do your job. I like to talk, when we first started doing this work, and a lot of that early work was done with the National Institute of Corrections down when they were in Longmont. We simply called it what works. And we started doing it, we were still in the midst of a kind of a get tough era. Lots of states were building prisons, and we were locking more folks up, and we were doing boot camps and all kinds of other things. And Dawn Andrews and I and several others would go around and talk about what the research told us and what worked. And we had a lot of resistance. We spent a lot of time trying to convince people that we actually knew something about corrections and about changing behavior. That's changed. That's not the sell that we do anymore. It's really not about the evidence. We have a tremendous amount of research. It's about implementation. The challenge is, how do you take this and put it into practice? And you wrestle with that every day. Staff turnover and changes in standards and policy and leadership. It makes it very difficult for sustaining some of this work. That's really the challenge that I have in helping you, but that you wrestle with all the time. And so, we'll hopefully talk a little bit about that. I will leave time for questions, both you know, along the way and at the end. If you have questions, you can ask me anything you want. If you want to write something down, we can do that as well. I'll answer anything that you have. But we didn't use the term evidence-based. That's a relatively new term. You should understand that there are different forms of evidence. The lowest form of evidence is anecdotal evidence, right? It's stories and testimonials and case studies, right? It's important because it helps us get through the work, right? Sometimes through the week. So if you're helping someone, you know, they're coming out of prison or they're in your halfway house or they're under supervision and they're doing well and they get a job or they're reporting and they have clean urines, you feel good about that. Maybe they even thank you for that work. You should feel good about that. But that's just anecdotal evidence. That's all that is. Drug courts, there's a good example. How many of you have drug courts in your community, right? You ever go to a graduation? They're very powerful events. Everybody comes, they tell their stories, the families are there, people cry, it's great, but that's only anecdotal evidence, that's all that is. The highest form of evidence is empirical evidence, results from controlled studies, data, research. Doesn't always make us feel good. Sometimes it contradicts what we believe. Right? I'll give you a quick story. Years ago in my state, we had a county had a big drug problem. Lots of drugs were coming down the interstate and in that community. And they had a very powerful judge. And he was tired of this revolving door. He would put people on probation, they would fail, he'd lock them up, they'd get out, they'd fail again, you know the drill. And so he wanted to know what could he do about that drug problem. So he started asking his fellow judges, where could he find a good drug program that worked? They sent him down to Miami Beach, Florida, South Beach, right? What better place to go for a drug program? Went down there, and the judge down there said, I have just the program for you, acupuncture. And he trotted up some poor indigents who said, acupuncture changed my life. And based on that anecdotal evidence, that judge came back to Ohio. He created an acupuncture program run by the probation department. Right? In my state, probation's right under the court. Looks something like this. They bought an old house, turned it into a day reporting center, assigned some POs, hired some counselors, got themselves an acupuncturist, and offenders that had drug problems had to report every morning at 8:30 in the morning. First thing they did was pee in a cup. Second thing they did was get acupuncture, 5 spots in the ear. Then they spent the rest of the day in other activities. Drug education groups, processing groups, 12-step groups, other things that don't work very well with offenders either, by the way. And they spent a lot of money, and they spent about a year doing it, right? And after that year, they called me. I live down the road, and they called and they said, Ed, we want you to evaluate our program. We want to know if it's working or not. Let me be clear. If somebody asks me if a correctional program is working, I usually know what they're referring to. They want to know is a change in people's behavior. Are they less likely to use drugs, steal, hurt people, do all the things that got them there in the first place, right? They don't care if they like the program. Hell, they don't even care if the staff like the program, right? When we fund correctional programs, we expect them to have some impact on behavior. It's pretty simple, right? My job was to evaluate the program. It's really not that hard. They had a whole bunch of drug offenders that were going to the program. They had a whole bunch of drug offenders that weren't going to the program, right? So when you create a correctional program here in Colorado, what do you expect? You expect the people that go and complete the program to do better than the ones that don't, right? I mean, that's pretty simple, right? That was my job. I'm a researcher, not that hard. But then they said, we want to know if acupuncture works. Now I had a problem. Because everybody was getting acupuncture, but they were getting all that other good stuff, right? Think about it. You deal with people all the time. You drug test them sometimes. Yeah, you give them good advice, right? Can't give them enough of that good advice, right? You enforce the rules of the court or the DOC, sure, right? You try to help them get a job, stay out of trouble, right? You do all those things. So if somebody is doing well under your care, is it because of the good advice? Is it because of the drug tests? Is it because they're afraid to go back to jail, right? You don't know. You have your little toolbox, you throw everything at them, you hope something sticks. That's how we do supervision. I know how we do it, right? That's what they were doing. They were doing acupuncture, supervision, good advice, education, groups, right? They were doing all that stuff. They wanted to know if acupuncture worked. To answer that question, I got them to allow me to do a random experiment. We randomly assigned offenders to one of three groups. Acupuncture. He'd come in the morning, he'd pee in a cup, he'd get acupuncture, he got all that other good stuff. Placebo group. Peter come in the morning, he'd pee in a cup, but we gave him acupuncture in the wrong spot. Ow. No, it's okay, we'll give it to you for sexual dysfunction. And then he got all that other good stuff. Control group. Worried now, right? No. Control group. He'd come in the morning, he'd pee in a cup, he wouldn't get any acupuncture. He'd get all that other good stuff. Acupuncture, placebo, control. Acupuncture, placebo, control. That's how random assignment works. The only folks who knew who were in the acupuncture group and the placebo group was the secretary that kept the list and the acupuncturist. The POs didn't know, the offenders didn't know. Obviously, they knew it was in the control group. So, what did we find at the end of the study? Who had the lowest recidivism rate of all three groups? The control group. Now, you ask why? It's basically because acupuncture is horse shit. Right? but the question, and you know, don't come up to me later and tell me it helped your neck, right? I mean, it may have medicinal value. I'm not an expert in that, but do you really think it's going to change the behavior of drug offenders? And we'd have booths all over America. Okay? Now, I'm telling you this story for a couple reasons. First, that's how we build knowledge, those kind of studies. Okay? They loved the program, by the way. They were in the newspaper every week, new programs going to fix the drug problem. Okay? But what did the data say? Data said not only didn't it work, they were actually doing worse. Which brings me to the second point I'm trying to make. Not everything we do in the name of treatment is effective. We can make people worse, and that's the last thing we want to do, is increase recidivism rates. And you think about it, because I thought about this a long time. Why'd they do worse? Why did the treatment and the pseudo-treatment group actually do worse? There's nothing harmful about getting a couple needles in the ear, right? It doesn't hurt you. How's it going to make it worse? I thought about this, and I think that the reason that those groups did worse was because they thought they were getting some treatment that was going to fix them. They could do what they always did, hang around with the same people, think the same way, do the same things, but they were getting this new treatment. It would be like if you wanted to lose weight, and you came to me, and I had a pill with nothing in it, and I said, you take this pill every day for 6 months, you can eat anything you want. You can eat as much as you want. You believe me. What would happen 6 months later? You'd be heavier, right? You're waiting for it to kick in, right? You're taking it every day. How's that fried chicken, right? We can do some harm. So we're going to talk about what we know from the research. We're going to talk about evidence-based practice. And we're going to talk about how we got there. I think for a while there's always been a lot of talk about evidence-based programs. And there's been a couple different ways folks have gone about that. One way they've gone about it is what they call the model program. Right? Somebody, usually an academic, develops a program and they pilot it and they collect data and some studies are done and they show some effect. Then they get another person to come in and do another study and it shows an effect. And then they send it out and say, okay, here it is. Here's the program. It's a model program. Right? That's one way we do it. I'm not a fan of that approach. I'm really not. And the reason's because I know you're all going to develop your own programs. You're going to do it your way with your offenders. You know, Colorado has different laws, different ways of doing things than everybody else does, and they all do. So I'd rather teach you the principles of designing effective programs because I know you're going, at the end of the day, you're going to do it yourself. And so I like to think of it as evidence-based decision-making. And the reason is because then that can be done at lots of levels. It can be done by the prosecutor, it can be done by the administrator, it can be done by the judge, it can be done by you. And evidence-based decision-making involves some steps and the use of some tools, instruments and tools. But it's not just the tools you have, it's how you use them. Let's take risk assessment. There's a good example, right? The first risk assessment tool was developed in 1928. 1928. Did a pretty good job. There's nothing new about risk assessment. But how was it done? How's it been done for many years in this country? Probation and parole officers fill out the form because they have to, and they shove it in the file and they never look at it again. In which case, I always said, what the hell are you assessing them for? Right? Or we spend a lot of time assessing them and we give them all the same thing. In which case, what are we assessing them for? So there's nothing new about some of these interventions, right? It's how we do them. These are the steps in evidence-based decision-making. It starts with assessment. Assessment of the client, right? Why? Because almost anything you want to fix starts with assessment. I don't just mean people, anything. You want to fix your car, and you take it to the garage, you don't want them to say, just leave it here, we'll tear it all apart. We'll find out what's wrong with it. You want them to what? You want them to hook it up to the computer. You want them to ask you what kind of sounds it's making. You want, right? You want an assessment done, because you want to know how much it's going to cost you. How much, is it worth fixing? Right? That's an assessment. When you go to the doctor, you're not feeling well, right? You don't want your doctor to pull out a drawer and say, which color pills do you like? You want your doctor to ask you questions, take your temperature, blood pressure, maybe draw some blood, an assessment. So assessment's the first step, but it's not just assessing the client, it's assessing your programs and your practices. Okay? We assess them, but we never assess ourselves. So I'm pleased to hear, the Colorado, you're a step ahead of the game because you're trying to look at yourself. You're trying to assess your program. Because I can tell you right now, half of what we do has no effect. We'd get the same effect by doing nothing. Okay? And people say to me all the time, oh, this is great, but we can't afford it. I always tell them, then quit doing stuff that doesn't work. Why do you keep doing stuff and think you're going to get a different outcome and nobody else has got an effect from it, right? Second step, look at the research. What does the research tell us? So you have a heart condition. You go to your physician and they say, I don't know anything about heart conditions. I got some ideas though. Got them from my neighbor, little Italian woman. What are you going to do? I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to find another doctor. I want my treatment based on what? Research, clinical trials, evidence. I want them to say to me, look, this is the most effective treatment we have, but if it doesn't work, we got to go to plan B and it's more intrusive. Right? I don't want them making that up as they go along. Right? And so we've got to look at the research. We have to design programs based on it, and there are some shortcuts. You're not researchers, I know that. You don't even have access to most of the academic articles that are out there. And so there's a website, for example, crimesolutions.gov. If you go to that website and you click on Bootcamps, it's going to come back and tell you they're rated as ineffective. And it's going to tell you why. If you click on adult drug courts, it's going to come back and tell you they're rated as effective. Some things it might tell you we don't know enough. Right? So there's ways for you to kind of sift through some of this. The third step is to ask yourself, do we have the available programming? Specifically to reduce risk. You want to be in the risk reduction business, not just the risk management business. Right? We can manage risk better than you. If we just lock them up, they'll manage risk a lot better than you can. Right? We want to reduce risk. So if you're going to start serving sex offenders, do you have the programming to do that? You've got dual diagnosed people coming through your doors. You don't have any mental health services. What makes you think you're going to be effective? So that's the third step. Fourth step is evaluation. You've got to evaluate the people you serve, right? Because what do we want to know? Well, we want to know if they learned anything. We want to know if they have new skills. We want to know if they got a job, right? Those are the things we want to learn. It means having a good quality assurance process, and that's the biggest challenge is quality assurance. It's very, because it never ends. And you're constantly hiring new staff and bringing new people in. And for all that reason, you have to have a model, and you have to sustain that model. All right, I'll talk a little bit about sustainability because I think that's important. It means having performance measures, and at the end of the day, it means having data. I can talk about data and studies and all that, but at the end of the day, if you're really going to be evidence-based, you've got to have data. You've got to have your own data. Are you moving in the right track? Every meta-analysis shows programs that evaluate themselves are more effective than those that don't. Why? They have data. You don't have to do it alone. There's all kinds of universities in this state. Where's John at? He's still here? He ducked out. He probably learned all this already. He's at here in Colorado Springs. There's great schools all around this state. Hook up with them. If you don't have the resources, see if they'll come in and help you do some research and look at your programs a little bit. Because even if you have to get started doing it that way, at least you'll have some data and you'll be able to improve. Finally, professionalism and knowledge from the staff. It means understanding this work. It means getting people trained. But the key word there is coached and skilled. I used to do a lot of training. I'd go around in the old days and go in and train people on something. And you spend a week with a group and train them. And it's always a bonding experience, right? At the end of the week, we'd sing Kumbaya, and we'd all talk about exchanging Christmas cards and shit like that, right? But then I go back 6 months later, and they weren't doing it. Oh, they were doing a little bit, maybe what they liked, or what was easy, or what the organization allowed them to do, right? And it dawned on me that training was not enough. And that's what the research says, by the way. It's not really effective. Training really isn't effective. It's got to come with coaching. And if you think about it, it's the same process you want to use to help an offender, right? Learn new behavior. You think it's enough because you tell them to do it? No. You got to what? You got to show them. You got to practice with them. You got to give them feedback. You got to correct them when they do it wrong, right? And that's the same process for teaching your staff new skills, right? Some of this stuff isn't easy. It isn't easy to do it, right? And we can't expect that we're going to do a 1 or 2 or 3 day, even a week-long training, and boom, they're going to get it. Right? So coaching. You have to figure that out. Internally build coaches. You can do it together if you're in a region. You hire, you exchange some resources with each other, so you have people to come in from another organization and help you, or this board might have people that go out and help folks, but you've got to figure that out. If not, you're just going to keep training people over and over and wonder why you're not getting where you want to be. So, what's the research tell us? As I like to say here, there's often a misapplication of research. You can find a study to support anything you want. Right? Don't believe me, go to the internet. As I said here, if you believed every study, you wouldn't eat anything. You just drink a lot of red wine. It's the only thing good for you. All right? That's brought to you by Napa Valley. All right? Lots of ways researchers summarize the research. We do meta-analysis, we do literature reviews, we ballot count. Meta-analysis is kind of the favorite way of doing it. But basically, what I'm an advocate of is looking at a body of knowledge, a body of research, not one study. Right? Not one study. You can, as I said, you can find a study support anything you want. You look hard enough. Right? It's that body of research. Here's what I mean by that. How many of you think cigarette smoking is bad for your health? Huh? How many of you have read all the research that's been published over the last 50 years? Not too many people. Do you know there's some studies that say it's not that bad? There are. They were funded by the tobacco industry. Mm-hmm. But most of us don't believe that. Why not? Because over the last 50 years, There have been hundreds of studies done all over the world by independent researchers who have basically concluded you smoke a lot, it can lead to cancer, emphysema, heart disease, the list goes on and on. In other words, we have a body of knowledge. We didn't always have that body of knowledge. It wasn't until '64 that the Surgeon General said smoking was bad for us. In the '30s, they advertised it as healthy, help digestion. What's changed? Not one study, not two studies, hundreds of studies. And most of us all accept that today. You've never read the research, and yet you believe that, right? It's an interesting area, too, because it's one of those areas where our anecdotal evidence lines up with our empirical evidence, right? We all know people have had health problems smoking or die young. I always ask, were they a smoker, right? I mean, so we have that anecdotal, but we also have all that empirical evidence to go along with it. So, you don't think we know anything about correctional interventions? You don't think we study you, right? I mean, there are thousands of criminologists who do nothing but study what you do. And so we have a body of knowledge. What does it tell us? A large body of research has indicated that correctional programs and interventions can be effective in reducing recidivism, but not all programs are equally effective. Most effective programs are based on some principles. It's called the RNR Model: risk, need, responsivity or treatment, and fidelity. Who, what, how, and how well. That's as simple as I know how to make it. Who do we target? What do we target? How do we do it? And how well we do it. The toughest are the how and the how well. They're the toughest. Risk and need really isn't that hard. That's actually pretty easy today. With good assessment, you can usually get there. Mm-hmm. The how's hard. Not easy to change somebody's behavior. Think it's easy? Try to change your own behavior. It's hard. Hard to get a bad habit. Hard to lose weight. Hard to change what we do. Right? It's not an easy thing. Right? You think you'd be better if somebody was helping you, coaching you, supporting you, pushing you a little bit? Sure you would. Right? We'll get to all that. Right? So let's start with the risk principle. Risk principle refers to the risk of reoffending, not the seriousness of the crime. But seriousness trumps risk. Seriousness trumps risk. You're all low risk. Most of you, I don't know all of you. Right? You're low risk. Why are you low risk? You don't have criminal histories. You're educated. You're employed. You hopefully aren't substance abusers. You don't hang around with offenders. Well, some of you do. A few of you do, but not socially. Right? In other words, you don't have a lot of risk factors. But if you went home tonight and you got in a fight with your neighbor and you really lost your temper and you bashed them on the head with a shovel and put them in the hospital, that's a violent crime. You could get locked up for that. Doesn't matter you're low risk. Right? So sometimes low risk people are incarcerated not because of their risk, because of what they did. We understand that. All right? I understand that. You need to understand that. But it also means you can be a low-risk sex offender, you can be a low-risk felon, you can be a low-risk misdemeanor, you can be a high-risk felon, a high-risk misdemeanor, right? And so we have to understand that, and that's a hard one because legislators often, and even judges, they're trained to look at those statutes. What's the seriousness of that crime? We're looking at risk in a little different context here, all right? So we have to understand that. As a general rule, treatment effects are stronger if we target high-risk offenders. We can do harm to low risk. Right? I learned a long time ago, if you want to reduce recidivism, focus on the people likely to recidivate. Right? It's like treating cancer. You might do some preventative stuff, but you're not going to give radiation and chemotherapy to people that don't have cancer. Right? You would do harm, wouldn't you? Mm-hmm. This is what risk looks like in the community. This is a community sample of I think, men. Right? And so when we look at these data, what we see is we have a group here, low risk, less than 10% will recidivate. Right? You know what that means programmatically? Here's what that means programmatically. You've got to put all 10 in the program to get one. That's what that means, because you don't know which one's going to fail. You put all 10 to get one. Now we got moderate risk, about a third. Then we got high risk. Now we're losing the bet because the bet's 50-50 and 50, almost 60% failed. This one does very high risk, so we're at 70%. What's that mean? That means we put 10 in the program to get 7. That's what that means. Right? So, first thing we learned is you want to reduce recidivism, focus on the higher risk people. Right? You don't want to focus on low risk because cost, it's not efficient, wastes money, and we'll do some harm. Okay? There are 3 elements to the risk principle and I want to talk about because this is really flushed out in a while. When we first started talking about this, we'd kind of brush over, you know. We'd say target higher risk offenders, everybody'd shake their head. Then we'd say give them the most intensive treatment, everybody'd agree with that, and then we can do harm. And we'd spend most of our time talking about the harm. But I want to talk about the other 2 as well. Let's start with target offenders with a higher risk. I think it's important for people to understand that even with the best programs, the best supervision, the best interventions, we're going to have failures. And when we're dealing with a high-risk group, we're still going to have a lot of failures. And I look at it differently than you. I'm looking at the data. You're looking at the individual sitting in front of you. You want them all to be successful. I'm telling you what the data tells us. That's not going to happen. Okay? This is the theory behind the risk principle. You have 100 high-risk offenders. The data tells us do nothing with them, 60% will fail. They'll get rearrested, reconvicted, get back in trouble again. Put them in a well-designed, evidence-based program, sufficient duration. Maybe you reduce it to 40%. That is a 30% reduction in recidivism. You cut it by a third. 20 goes into 63 times. You've cut it by a third. You cut some cancers by a third, you win the Nobel Prize for medicine. Now you got 100 low-risk offenders. The data tells us 10% will recidivate. Put them in the same program, you'll double their recidivism rate. That is 100% increase. You double it. But in the end, who had the lower recidivism rate? Come on, it's not a rhetorical question. Let's go back and look at the data. Who had the lower recidivism rate? Low risk. Only 20% failed. They failed at half the rate as the high risk group. I didn't ask you where we reduced recidivism. I asked you who had the lower recidivism rate. The mistake we make is comparing high risk to low risk. That's a mistake. That tells us nothing about a treatment effect. And we do it all the time. Who's easier to handle, low risk or high risk? Low risk, right? They show up, they pay their money, they have clean urines, they get a job. Right? High risk are a pain in the ass. They show up and say things like, "This is going to take long," like they got somewhere to go. Right? But who are we worried about? High risk. Who's likely to recidivate? High risk. Okay. We're looking for a treatment effect. Let me explain. Let's say I got 10 people over here, you're not feeling well. Got some kind of virus. I got 10 people over here, you're feeling great. You take them to the doctors and you sit in the waiting room and hold their hands while they're waiting to see the doctor. Right? Some of you might feel better. You get some medication, some fluid, right? Let's say a third of you feel better. That's a treatment effect. I've reduced your illness by 30%. Anybody over here going to feel better? Now, what might happen? Some of you might get sick. You're not all going to get sick, though. Let's say a third of you get sick. That's a negative effect. I increased your illness by 30%. But how many of you are still healthy? 70%. How many of you are healthy? Only 30%. You're half as healthy as they are. But I improved your health. I made you worse. When we don't look at risk and the effects of risk, we mask that. We don't see the treatment effect. We are looking for treatment effects. And the only way you're going to know that is compare high to high and low to low. It's the only way you're going to know. And researchers have violated that for many, many years. All right? Number 2, provide most intensive treatment. And when we first started doing this, you know, we'd go out and we'd tell everybody this, and they'd all agree, yeah, we need to do that. And there's one thing I learned assessing programs, and I assessed a lot here in Colorado in my day, all right? And I'm going to tell you what that is. Most correctional programs in this country are one size fits all. That's just the sad truth. We give everybody the same thing. Some stay a little longer, but we give them all the same thing. Right? And this is really a question of dosage, right? What does intensive mean in practice? What does it mean in practice? How do we translate that? So I went through a very terrible illness, actually 9 years ago. All right? I'm a survivor of pancreatic cancer. Right? You will not meet many people in your life that survive that. Right? So I was high risk and I made it. So I understand the whole risk principle. Right? But when you go through something like that, you got to get chemo and radiation. Right? What do you think happens if they give you too much radiation? It could kill you. What happens if they don't give you enough? It could kill you, right? And so they were very careful. They're very prescriptive how much you get. They monitor you. Are you doing better? Sometimes they stop for a while, right? Let you catch up. And as I went through all that, I got thinking, boy, that isn't what we do. We just shove them all in and give them the same thing. And I started looking at the research. Here's what it says. First thing it says is, the longer somebody's in treatment, the greater the effects. So what's that research telling us? Keep them in treatment. That's what it's telling us. By the way, mental health, substance abuse, lots of areas. Problem is, treatment goes on too long, effects go down. Negative effects. Why do you think treatment effects go down if you keep people too long? What's that? No, there's nothing wrong with repetitive learning, especially for them. Well, let me ask it a different way. Anybody here ever do a diet for 2 years? Huh? No. Why not? Too hard. We give up, right? Or we lose a little weight, and what do we say? My pants are fitting better, I'm done, right? I mean, and they do that too, by the way. They get a job, so what do they say? I don't need that substance abuse stuff anymore, right? I mean, and so we've got a problem here, because the research is telling us keep them in treatment, but then it's telling us, uh-oh, don't keep them too long, right? So we started doing some research. We did a study of Ohio's kind of like Colorado in a way. We're a Community Corrections Act state. We have lots of halfway houses. We have lots of big providers around the state. We've built these what we call community-based correctional facilities. We have 18 or 19 of them around the state. Some of them are run by private providers. Some are run by the county. And we had a facility near us that kept track of the hours that somebody was in group. Not just the days, but the hours. And so we could count the hours. This is what they looked like. It was a 100-bed facility. And in our first study, this is what we found. Moderate and high risk. We didn't have enough low moderate. At the time, they used the LSI. But what did we find? And this is the dosage over here. The hours are on the side. Increasing the dosage for moderate risk got us an effect, but not nearly as much as it got us for the high risk. Right? So we did another study. We expanded the sample because we needed more on the other end. We broke it down by 50 because I wanted to not only look at decline, I wanted to see if it started coming back up again. And we looked at low, moderate, moderate, and high. And here's what we found. Went down, but went back up. Moderate, went down, but when they got too much, went back up. But look at high risk. Continued to go down. It continued that downward drop. We did another study recently in Ohio looking at juveniles. And we did not have hours. This is about 10,000 kids, so it's a big study. We looked at low, moderate, and high by time. That was the best measure we had. We didn't have a better precise measure. But look what happens when they kept low-risk kids over 3 months. Recidivism went up. When they kept them over 6 months, it went up again. It basically doubled. Moderate risk kids doubled, but high risk kids went down. And I don't want people to think it means you got to keep high risk kids over a year. I don't believe that. What it means is you've got to get the dosage in, and I've done it in 4 or 5 months. You can do it. But I think it's what it's showing us is the same effects with kids. Too much, we're overdoing, especially for the lower and moderate risk kids. We're making them worse. Higher risk kids, they need that higher dosage. We put some guidelines together, and everybody is slavishly following these. Right? You're probably all, worried about how many hours you put people in. I almost regret doing that. They're really meant as guidelines. And here's the takeaway from it. So what we saw was 100, 150, we saw an effect for moderate, double it for high risk. But here's one of the takeaways. In this case, 100 hours for high risk had little effect. Basically, that takeaway is you can't have one size fits all. Okay. I don't think hours are if you move them beyond hours, what you really want to do is measure their progress at increments, just like they did when I went through treatment. Okay. Some people learn quicker than others. Some get it. They get the skills, right? Fine. They're motivated. They may not need that much. But unfortunately, because we never do that, we just put them in, wait to the end, right? We often don't know that. So if you don't know that, you're probably going to stick with the hours. But it's really about how moving them through programs and making sure they learn. And sometimes you have to be creative. Okay? I did a program once in Michigan, and the judge had a program, after-school program for kids, and he'd bring these kids in. He bought an old school, and he'd bring them in every day, 4 to 7. And they did groups, and then they did their homework, and he fed them, and they did some skill building. But here's what he ended up doing. High-risk kids came Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Moderate-risk kids came Tuesday and Thursday. So with a little schedule change, he did 2 things. He kept the low and the moderate and the high separated, and he increased the dosage for the high risk. Right? So all we counted was COG groups. We didn't count work, we didn't count school, we didn't count mental health, we didn't count case management. I'm not saying those things don't have an effect. We just didn't count them. Right? It's very hard to do that work in a community setting because it's very fluid. But I think you sit down with your programs and you ask the question, how do we increase the intensity for the higher risk people? Do we keep them longer? Do we make them go to more groups? Here's another way we do it, advanced practice. So in a lot of the curriculums we develop, we're not going to develop a curriculum with 250 hours. Nobody'd use it. But what we do is we develop a curriculum that's flexible, and then you build in on advanced practice so that after they complete that part of the program, the higher risk guys are continuing to learn how to apply it in different settings. Right? 'Cause they don't always see the settings. They only see it the way you've taught them. Number 3, increasing treatment for low risk will increase failure rates. Why? Low risk learn antisocial behavior from high risk. Any of you have teenage kids? Anybody have kids? Who has kids? Some of you. So you want your kids to hang around with kids that use drugs and don't go to school? Why not? Maybe your kid will rub off on them. No, we would never do that as a parent. We do it all the time, in the criminal justice system, juvenile justice system. Judge locks up a kid for a couple weeks to teach him a lesson, right? Who are we putting them in there with? High-risk kids. And that brings us to the second one. It disrupts pro-social networks. When we take low-risk people and we do intensive things with them, we disrupt what makes them low-risk. Again, you're all low-risk. If I took you right now and put you in the best program we can find in Colorado, we'll find a nice, secure residential program for you. How many of you'd lose your jobs? How many of your families would have trouble getting by without you? How many of your neighbors would have a welcome home from the correctional treatment facility reception for you? Not too many, right? I wouldn't reduce your risk. I'd give you some new risk factors, right? And third, of course, increased reporting and surveillance leads to more violations and more revocations. That's what all that reads. We've done, to hell now, 50 years of studies of intensive supervision. There isn't a PO in America that doesn't believe if they just had a smaller caseload, they'd be more effective. You know what they'd be more effective on? Catching them with violations. Right? I always tell people, my wife and I had 4 kids. That meant we had a caseload of 2. And they still did shit they weren't allowed to do. So trust me, you're not going to get it low enough. All right? Now there's a point at which you can't be effective, but there's no magic number. It's more around what you do with them than how many. Lots of research. This is a study out of Canada looking at intensive rehabilitation supervision. This is what they found: 2-year recidivism, treatment group, high risk, treatment, non-treatment group high risk. So those blue bars, they reduced recidivism about 40% for high risk offenders. Look what happened to low risk offenders. They more than doubled their recidivism rate. Now, I know what you're thinking, right? That's Canada. They only have like 10 offenders in the whole country. Right? Well, we did this study. At the time, it was the largest study ever done. And then I got an email from some Colorado person that said they did an even larger study. And so I did an even bigger one after that. All right? But at the time, this was the biggest one ever done. We looked at 13,000 offenders. Ohio is a state that spends a lot of money on community-based corrections. I think we have 1,000 halfway house beds. We've built all these facilities around the state. So it's a big budget item. And when we did this study, every year these programs would go to the legislature and argue for more money. And the money came out of the Department of Corrections budget. Right? So Reggie Wilkinson was our director. He got tired of that, and he says, I'm going to commission a study. I want to know if they actually work or not. So we got the study, and so we looked at all these facilities. Half our sample were probationers, and half our sample were parolees. So, and we matched them, all right, with appropriate cases. So it pretty much covered everybody. Here's what we found. This is the treatment effect for low risk. Okay? The facilities are at the bottom. That doesn't mean anything to you, but these red bars are negative numbers. That means that is the percentage increase in recidivism for low-risk offenders. Only a few programs you can see had a minor effect on low-risk offenders. So the vast majority of programs that we were funding were having higher failure rates when they got low-risk offenders. I said to Reggie, why would you spend $65 a day to increase recidivism rates? Because that's what we were doing. These are the same programs for high-risk offenders. Same programs. It's like I flipped it, right? I flipped the chart. What do you see now? Most of the programs reduced recidivism for high risk. Who are we worried about? High risk. And let me show you where you see the risk principle. Down here, we'll just take this one. It's where I grew up. Mahoning County reduced recidivism 32% for high-risk offenders. They cut it by 30%, pretty good. Here they are over here. They increased recidivism for low risk by 29%. And when you put them together, guess what? They look like zero. They had an effect. Who do they have an effect on? High risk, right? Now, you should also know we had 8 programs did not reduce recidivism at any risk level. We looked at low, moderate, high. They did not reduce recidivism at any risk level. Does anyone know what the scientific term for that is? Shitty program. That's the scientific term for that. There's 2 things I learned from this study, big things. One was the risk principle, and the other was quality mattered, because we looked at quality, and you can guess these programs down here, they were the higher quality programs. We replicated it in 2010. We replicated the study with 20,000 offenders. We improved the methodology, and we found pretty much the same thing: low risk, high risk. But a couple points I want to make here. One, these programs down here, if you look at that bar, they reduce recidivism 50% or higher. That's a straight up comparison too, no probabilities there. Cut it by half. Second thing that happened was these programs are no longer with us in Ohio. The state canceled their contracts. They shut one facility down. I never thought they would, because they built it. And they basically said 10 years of data is enough. And guess who got the contracts? The better programs got the contracts. So, you know, there's a double-edged sword to data, all right, for you. Not for me, I didn't care. But I'm just saying that it partly was because the state gave them a lot of chance to improve themselves. They gave them technical assistance. They tried to help them, but these programs either were so dysfunctional or so resistant to change, they couldn't get there. And at the end of the day, the state said, we're done. We've seen the risk principle with females. Low harm, moderate, low moderate harm, moderate about even, and high risk of treatment effect. We've seen it with sex offenders, right? That's low, that's a comparison group, all treatment and successful treatment. They actually did worse because they kept them longer. Here and here. We have seen it with juveniles. Very harmful for low and moderate risk juveniles. When you put them in residential and community and institutions, triple or higher their recidivism rates. You know, there's just no way around it. They're just, you know, these kids, I think that first issue, the contamination, is much stronger with a 15 and 16-year-old than it is with a 30-year-old. Let's face it. You know, we're not going to automatically go hang around with a bad crowd when we get older. It disrupts us, but we don't have the same, we're not as malleable, right? But with low-risk kids, we really do some harm. Okay, that gets us to the need principle, right? This is, and we'll go through this quickly because I know you all know it. It's the body of research around risk factors, and even though we know it, I always see lots of programs that stray from it. All right? I think there's a couple different reasons. One is the people often that you serve have a lot of needs and a lot of problems, and we almost don't know where to begin. And we fail then to separate the ones that are criminogenic from the ones that aren't, because we want to help them. And I always say there's a difference, especially reentry. You know, I say there's reentry programs that want to help people, and there's reentry programs that want to reduce recidivism. You can do both, but most don't. Most just do the helping, and they never get around to recidivism. And so that's why understanding this is so important. The second reason I think we fail is sometimes our training gives us a very narrow perspective of criminal behavior. Here's what I mean by that. If you're trained in substance abuse, what are you looking for? That client comes in the door, what are you looking for? Come on, be honest. Substance abuse. The minute you find it, bingo, that's it, right? Mental health, you're trained in mental health, what are you looking for? Evidence of mental health. Read those psych reports, right? Depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, right? That's what they're trained to look for, right? That's the second reason, right? And we see epidemic. Right now, we're in my state, major heroin epidemic. We're at ground zero for it, right? And so it's easy to think drugs are their problem. But you start looking hard at them, right? That's just part of their life. You ask them how many finished high school, how many had a job, how many got in trouble before they got started using heroin, right? And you start seeing that this is just part of a lifestyle. It's wrapped up within a whole bunch of risk factors. The last reason is because everybody thinks they're an expert in criminal behavior. And I don't mean you guys are, but everybody. Your legislature, your governors, your mayors, they all think, you know, your family, right? How many of your family tell you how to do your job? All right? Tell them you work with offenders. Oh, they'll give them your opinion. Everybody has an opinion. I was on a plane once. I was flying to Boise. And I was seated next to this elderly woman, you know, one of these chatty types, and wouldn't take a hint. And she asked me what I did for a living. I made the mistake of telling her. And for 4.5 hours, she told me how to solve the crime problem. Didn't get off in Salt Lake, stayed right on with me to Boise. Sorry, now I just tell them I'm a proctologist, they leave me alone. So, antisocial, pro-criminal attitudes, values, beliefs, and cognitive emotional states. Rage, anger, defiance, criminal identity. These are cognitive emotional states. Right? You see yourself as a tough guy, as a thug, as a gangbanger. That's your identity. That's much different than somebody who says, I made a mistake. Right? Rage, been cut off on the freeway? Who the hell does he think he is? Right? I'm going to go after him. Man, that's not how you think. You're in this cognitive emotional state. When you calm down, it's like, what was I thinking? Right? These are views that are supportive of a criminal lifestyle. Often rationalizations about their role, their victims, their behavior, their friendship, their substance abuse, right? Their work. I mean, they use these minimizations and these rationalizations for everything they do. Right? Didn't go to work. You know what? That boss is a jerk. You know, I can make more money doing something else. Right? Substance use. Everybody does it. Right? Of course, it's what they think. It's the content of thought, not the skills. That's different. Right? We start with the content, attitudes, values, and beliefs, and they're not, and they are deeper. Attitudes, values, and take employment. There's a good one, right? Most of us grew up with the value of education and work. Our parents instilled that in us. You work hard and you get ahead. Those were our core values. You get an education so you can get ahead. Those are values. Our beliefs were, if we did those things, we could make it. Right? Right? And attitudes were, you go to work every day. You do what the boss says. You show them you can do it, right? Or you go to school and you pay attention and you don't sass the teacher. Those were our attitudes, right? And so you see how they come together. And for most of us, that's how we've gotten to where we are, right? By getting a good education or working hard in our jobs, right? So it's negative expressions about the law, right? It's unfair. Everybody does it. It's negative expressions about conventional institutions and rules and authority, about their ability to achieve through it, and lack of empathy and sensitivity to others, that cold-heartedness. Who'd I hurt? What's the big deal? So I use drugs. I sell drugs. Right? You got a real challenge, I'm thinking about it here in Colorado with the whole drug thing now. Yeah, that's going to be a problem for you. Yeah, but, oh well, I'll be dead by then. All right. They minimize their behavior, right? They verbalizations that say what they did wasn't so bad. You probably have, you can think of a lot more than me, but you know, they deny responsibility. What do you hear? Right? I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. I was high, I don't remember. My favorite, the some dude defense. Some dude told me, right, I could drive his car, right? And we're looking for some dude, by the way. If we ever catch him, crime's going way down, right? You think of others, you let me know, right? Deny of injury, admit the act, but minimize the harm. Yeah, I stole their stuff, but they had insurance. Or I beat them up, I've been beat up worse, right? So that kind of minimization. Here's one, deny the victim, reverse the role, right? Who's good at that? Domestic violence offenders, sex offenders, they're very good at that, right? Reversing the role. System bashing, and then finally the gang member mantra, appeal to higher loyalties, right? Second, pro-criminal associates in isolation from pro-social others. Associates provide the context. They provide often role models. They act as reinforcement. But this is a key one. Isolation from pro-social others increases risk. It's not just knowing criminals. And this is an area where I think we do a lot of risk management. And we don't do enough risk reduction. This is a major risk factor. We all know it, right? We all know it. Your mothers knew it, by the way. And when if you had kids, you knew it. You're worried about who they hang around with. But you don't lock them in the house. You want them to hang around with who? Good role models, right? It's the flip side of this. I always tell probation and parole officers, don't just ask them who they get in trouble with. Ask them who they don't get in trouble with. Because you got to build that network, right? These are some things I put up on the board because these are the three things we most commonly do. We restrict associates, we ban hangouts, and we set curfews. All risk management. That's all it is. Minute we go away, what happens? They go right back. Right? What do we got to do? We got to teach them how to recognize negative influences, practice new skills, okay? Teach them how to have a relationship without getting into trouble. What if it's brother they get in trouble with? Okay, you're never going to see him again. Give me a break. Okay? Here's one. I always love this one. They used to do this day reporting center in Iowa. This is a good one. They would make them bring a positive association once a month. A pro-social person. Offenders hated it. Okay? One guy brought his grandmother. Okay? But it was great because I was there that day. And A, grandma didn't approve. B, grandma wasn't afraid to tell them all. Right? And what did they want to do? They wanted to get him closer to his grandmother because he loved his grandma and she cared about him. But when he was doing stuff, he stayed away from her. So things you can do, you have to think about this because if you can't hook them up with pro-social people, they try to isolate themselves sometimes, but doesn't last long because we're not social isolates, we're social animals. Third, temperament, personality patterns, weak socialization, impulsivity, there's a big one, right? How many times you have somebody doing well and they screw up? And you ask them what happened. What do they say? I don't know. Right? What were you thinking? I don't know. Right? I wasn't thinking. Right? I had a parolee the other day. I interviewed this guy. I said, are you working? He said, no, I quit my job. I said, why? He said, I wasn't getting enough hours. I said, how many are you getting now? He said, none. I said, you know, you're working backwards, right? I said, most people don't quit their jobs till they got another job lined up. Not him. He showed them. Mm-hmm. He went from 20 to 0. It's that kind of thinking that gets him into trouble. Most of us would say, you know, I got to pay bills. I'm going to line another job up, right? I mean, they don't do that cost benefit. They don't think through some of those decisions. So you teach them. That's a skill. We teach them that. That's part of the skill of thinking, right? Adventurous, pleasure-seeking, restless aggressiveness, egocentrism, weak problem solving, and lack of coping skills, right? They get into situations and they don't know how to get out of them. So what do? Do what they always did, right? And I think this is one of the fundamental mistakes we make. We think they just don't want to do it. So we spend most of our time motivating them or yelling at them or threatening them. They don't know how to do it. I interview people coming out of prison all the time, and you know what they almost all say the same thing. I can't wait to see my family. I hate this place. I'm never coming back again. I learned my lesson. I'm going straight, right? And I'll say to them, well, you didn't the last 3 times you were here. Or I'll say, so what are you going to do when you get into this situation? And they'll go, well, I'm not going to get in that situation. My friends all know I'm going straight. And I go, well, how do they know? Is it on the internet or something, right? Here's what I know. They don't have a plan. They've not rehearsed it. They've not practiced their risky situations. And all they know is prison's bad, don't like it, don't want to come back. And, of course, that fades very quickly. And oftentimes they get in situations and they do the same thing. We assume they just don't want to do it. I think a lot of it is that skill deficit on how to handle it. History, of course, is a major risk factor. Family factors, including criminality and other problems in the home, low levels of affection. For kids, it includes poor parental supervision and discipline, outright neglect and abuse. Low levels of educational, vocational, financial achievement. That's the key word. We'll talk more about that. low levels of involvement in pro-social leisure activities, and substance abuse. Those are the major set, right? There are minor risk factors. There are minor risk factors, right? So if you live in a bad neighborhood, for example, lots of crime, lots of drugs, lots of police, that increases your risk, but it's not a major risk factor. Lots of people live in bad neighborhoods and don't get into trouble, right? But it can contribute. And there are other minor risk factors. I want to just show this in a minute because I think that there's always a lot of attention around mental health and mentally disordered offenders. Every time there's some celebrated incident, the first thing they trot out of the psychiatrist to start talking about all the psychiatric issues. But let's look at the research on mentally disordered offenders. Conventional clinical wisdom says that criminal activities of MDOs are best explained by psychopathological models. Okay. Assessments focus on psychiatric diagnosis, psychiatric symptomology, and personal distress, things like anxiety and depression. Okay. They take a while and they're expensive. What's the empirical research say? Psychopathological model has little relevance regarding the prediction of MDO criminal behavior. Gendreau conducted a meta-analysis on studies of psychiatric symptomology and general recidivism, found a correlation of 0. Bonta, 98, meta-analysis, found correlation between having a diagnosed mental disorder, mood disorder, psychosis, and general and violent recidivism ranged from 0.01 to negative 0.17. Criminogenic risk factors were the strongest, and the major correlates appear to be the same. Recent meta-analysis, 2014, looking at general and violent recidivism. And we do see some differences here. Violent offenders tend to have higher criminal history, more criminal attitudes, stronger antisocial personality, but a little lower in family and marital and employment and substance abuse. Doesn't matter, they were all significant. But then they looked at clinical factors, psychosis, schizophrenia, mood disorder, prior admissions, length of hospitalization, psychiatric treatment. Virtually no correlation. Only one clinical diagnosis had a very strong correlation. Antisocial personality disorder. It's off the charts, stronger than any of the other factors. Okay? The point is that millions of people suffer from mental illness. Okay? Many of them are in our jails and our prisons because we don't have mental health facilities anymore. Right? And I'll show you another study later that really shows that oftentimes they're mentally ill and criminal. I put this together real quick, just get it out of the way. This is a chart that shows the factors, the risk, and the need. So we got history, personality, cognition, associates. Here we got family, school and work, leisure, recreation, and substance abuse. And the reason I put this here is because I want to be clear. We believe these four run through these four. These are the big four. Okay? Here's the problem. We get an offender, here's where we start. Get him a job, sober him up. That's where we start. We don't get any employment, we get almost no effect, and substance abuse a small effect, because this is what's driving them. If we can change how they think and change who they hang around with, give them better problem-solving skills, practice their risky situations, guess what? They're going to be with their family. They don't want to hang out and get in trouble. They're not going to use drugs as much, and they're going to get a job. But oftentimes we start with these, and we don't get very far. Real quick, this is a study that Pennsylvania did. I just want to show, I'm going to go through this real quick. This is a study that looked at criminogenic factors of parolees. I just want to show you what they found. Violators continue to hang around with individuals with criminal backgrounds, less likely to live with a spouse, less likely to be in a stable, supportive relationship, and less likely to identify someone in their life who served in a mentoring capacity. And it's that last finding that kind of gave me the idea for our influencer model. Because what they found was that the parolees that made it almost all said they had people they could go to. And so did you. Most of you are here where you're at because you had people in your life that you could go to. All right? And so it got me thinking, but we'll come back to that. All right? What did they find with employment and financial? Well, violators were less likely to have job stability, less likely to be satisfied with employment, less likely to take low-end jobs and work their way up, like most of you have, more likely to have negative attitudes toward employment, less likely to have a bank account, and more likely to report they were barely making it, yet the success group reported double the median debt. You know why? Because the success group was often taking care of their family. That's why. It wasn't about getting a job. It's about working a job. About seeing employment as a way to put the past behind them, as a way to move up, right? And so, because I can tell you what all the studies now are showing about these post-prison employment programs, showing no effect. None. Because it's not about getting them a job. It's about teaching them how work's important and then getting them a job. Showing them how to be successful at work. Right? If not, you know how long they last. Right? They were more likely to report use of alcohol and drugs on parole, but no difference in prior assessment of dependency. The difference was the failures could not cope. Right? When they had stressful situations, what did they do? They go get high. And this is a good one because you know what? We can practice that before they ever get out. We can rehearse and practice their stressful situations because they've all had them before. Right? Give them a plan, rehearse it, make sure they know they got plan A and plan B. Right? And finally, they had all the antisocial attitudes. They blamed others, didn't accept responsibility, viewed violations as an acceptable option, right? You know what they said? Hey, I knew I was going to be dirty. I'm going out with a bang, right? We call that fatalistic thinking, right? What the hell, right? I'm going back to the joint. I'm going to have one hell of a time, right? So, and finally, they didn't differ in finding a place to live or in finding a job. Now, having a place to live is a basic human need. And jobs, well, think about that for a minute. Think about your first job when you were 16. The clock never moved. Most of us were working just to make a few bucks, right, to go out. Now think about work for most of us. It's who we are. What's changed, right? I mean, right now, we don't know where the day went. We love what we do. Relationships, we're helping people, right? Our friends at work. Monday's my favorite day, right? I love to go back to the office, get stuff done. Right? What's changed? My attitudes, my values about work, my belief about work. So it's not just having a job. It's getting them to understand that, right? And that's what Pennsylvania found. That's what they found in their study. Right? All right, let's get this and we'll take a break. We're scheduled for a break. The need principle. Criminogenic, just a fancy word for dynamic risk factors. I wish they'd have called them dynamic risk factors, right? I think there's a lot of problems that they didn't. But criminogenic, these are things related to criminal behavior. Friends, associates, and substance abuse, and so on. Non-criminogenic are dynamic needs that people have. They're just not correlated with criminal conduct. Anxiety, there's a good one. I actually like anxious criminals. I interviewed a bank robber one time, and I asked this guy, I said, what was it like to rob a bank? I mean, think about that. Go in a bank with a gun, right? And he said, I was so nervous I could hardly do it. I said, well, you robbed like 6 banks. He said, I took some Valium after that. It got a lot easier. Right? Boot camps, physical condition, get them in great shape. There's a great theory for you. Right? Who the hell wants them in great shape? Right? We ought to have couch potato programs for them. Right? I remember you guys had a bunch of boot camps here. I remember going to a boot camp one time and I asked the guy, I said, what have you gotten out of the program? And he leaned in my face, he said, I'm in the best physical condition of my life, sir. I thought, oh good, he can run me down, kick my ass even quicker now, right? It's the Christopher Columbus style of program design. When he set out, he didn't know where he was going. When he got there, he didn't know where he was. And when he got back, he didn't know where he'd been. He did it 4 times. He did it on state money. Right? Now, these are not criminogenic needs, all right? These are some of the theories I've come across. Offenders lack creativity theory. There's a good one for you. I did this halfway house in California once for former drug addicts on parole. And they spent all day long doing art therapy. And I remember saying to the woman that ran it, why do you spend all your time on art therapy? She said, it reduces stress. I said, you're right. I said, you must have the most relaxed drug addicts in the state of California. I said, what are they supposed to do when somebody offers them drugs? Wait a minute, I got to draw your picture, but don't go too far, right? It's one little trigger among a whole broad set of risk factors. Lots of us have stress. We don't rob banks or use heroin, right? I mean, it targets stress, but that's all she was doing, right? Change their diet, that's another California one. This was a TC back in the day. She'd make them wear diapers to come to group if they misbehaved, right? Well, it's a shaming technique. You're gonna act like a baby, I'm gonna treat you like a baby. Here's the problem. Anybody here like to be shamed and humiliated? No? What do you think you get when you shame and humiliate high-risk offenders? Angry high-risk. Who are then thinking about what? Getting even, which is what? Antisocial thought, which we're trying to extinguish, right? Now this has always been my favorite. Male offenders need to get in touch with their feminine side theory. This one goes like this. The reason us men are aggressive brutes is we're just not sensitive enough. And so this was a halfway house in Jersey. They had them dress up and go to group in drag. Right? So if you are ever mugged in Jersey by an ugly guy in a dress, right? And this was before cell phones, I would have took a picture. I really wish I'd have had a picture of it, but I do have some for you here, right? Here's one. It's hard for you to see it, but I'll read it to you. Dance program gets juveniles moving on the right track. There in a small, secure, concrete area, young male offenders dance their way toward a new outlook on life. Okay. The good news is they're dancing to rappers like Tupac, 50 Cent, and R. Kelly. So they got role models there as well. Right. Here's one. Running teaches inmates the value of success. I thought we didn't want them to run. New Mexico inmates to be offered yoga. Okay. Drum circles, my favorite. I'll read, they were trying to sell this to the Department of Corrections in Georgia. She introduced the first drum circle in a New Zealand prison, and she describes it as wow. That's the data they have right there, wow. Staff were amazed because most clients continued drumming for 2 hours without stopping to smoke. It doubled as a smoke cessation program, right? Here's one. Gardening conquers all. How to cut your jail recidivism rates in half. I got a call a couple years ago from New York, Rikers Island, and they said, we're going to do gardens for our inmates. They said, what do you think we'll get? I said, vegetables. That's what you're going to get. And they hung up after that. But circus clown trains troubled teens. Now that's a skill that could come in handy, right? They'll be able to get over fences and get away from the cops. And then dog sledding is restorative justice. Exercising wilderness skills was seen as a way of rebuilding the perpetrator's self-esteem. So they got to make sure that the perpetrator feels good about themselves. Again, this is a useful skill, survival skills. If they ever escape from prison, they'll be able to make it for a while before we catch them, right? And let me say this, I think it's important, especially in institutional settings, not so much in the community setting. Sometimes it happens in halfway houses, but in prisons, they call everything a program. Choir's a program, right? Art's a program, everything's a program. I think you have to distinguish between your core programs and your activities. Core programs are designed to reduce risk. Activities are there to reward, to keep them busy, to maybe develop some talent. but they're not the same as core correctional programs that are designed to what? Reduce substance use, to change your thinking, to teach you how to handle risky situations, right? And I get calls all the time from people that just think, you know, that they have a love and a passion for something, so they want to bring this to other people, right? I was in Delaware a couple of weeks ago, and I sat next to, turned out it was Joe Biden's youngest daughter, and she's on this board of this halfway house, and she said, you know, after her brother died, she said, I took up boxing, and it really helped me get the anger out. She said, I want to put a boxing gym upstairs for these offenders. And she looked at me and she goes, that isn't a good idea, is it? And I said, no, probably not, right? But that's her passion, right? So she just thinks that, you know, she'll just somehow be contagious. It's not a correctional program. Not a correctional program. By the way, if they like it too much, it's probably not a good program either. I never thought about that. You put that on your list of how to evaluate a program. This important chart, what it is telling us, it's a meta-analysis result, that basically the more criminogenic areas you target, the greater the reduction in recidivism. I think there's a very simple reason for this. People aren't high risk because they have a risk factor. They're high risk because they have a bunch of risk factors. Think about that. Let's take a simple one. Employment. For a probationer or parolee here in Colorado, you think not having a job's a risk factor for them? Yeah, sure. It's a risk factor for you? It is? If you lost your job, would you start selling drugs? Mugging old ladies? Robbing houses? What would you do? Find another job. Being unemployed doesn't make you high risk for criminal behavior. Unless you said things like, I can make more money in a day, you do in a week. I'm not into that 9-to-5 thing. I'm not working for 10 bucks an hour. My friends aren't working, they're doing all right. Now being unemployed puts you at risk because you have those antisocial attributes and you have 40 hours a week to get in trouble. But just being unemployed doesn't make us high risk for criminal behavior. We have to look at it differently. What's it mean? It means we have to have multimodality treatment. And what's this telling us? Take a hard look at how much time you spend on non-criminogenic activities and how much time you spend on criminogenic activity. Because as that gets away, by the way, it's 80-20. That's what we look for. As you get away from that, as you have more targets that are non-criminogenic, your recidivism, that bar is going to get closer together. And here's a study, and we'll take a break. This is a friend of mine did this study. Bob Morgan is a psychologist. He studied offenders with mental illness, incarcerated offenders with diagnosed mental illness. He compared them to non-diagnosed mentally ill offenders. What did he find? 66% had belief systems supportive of a criminal lifestyle. When compared to other offender samples, male offenders with mental illness scored similar or higher than non-mentally disordered offenders. On the criminal sentiment scale, 85% of the men, 72% of the women with mental illness and antisocial attitudes, values, and beliefs, which was higher than the incarcerated sample without mental illness. What did he conclude? Criminal thinking styles differentiate people who commit crimes from those who do not, independent of mental illness. That it needs, that incarcerated persons with mental illness are often mentally ill, and criminal needs to be treated as a co-occurring disorder. Okay? That's what he found. Now, I was interested in this study because one of the questions he doesn't answer is, did they bring them with them or did they develop them while they were there? Right? It's a good question. So we went into, and I was also interested in looking at juveniles. We went into 3 institutions in Ohio. We assessed all the kids that are incarcerated in Ohio. We compared the diagnosed mentally ill kids to the non-diagnosed mentally ill kids. We found similar results to Morgan, and time did not matter. Doesn't look like they developed them more while they were there. Now, it's just one study, it's juveniles, but I think what it's telling us is, we're not saying they don't need treatment for mental illness. We're not saying that. They also need treatment for those other criminogenic risk factors. right? Some people, their mental illness, their aberrant behavior, police see them, arrest them, end up in jail. But you can figure that out with assessment. But if they have those other criminogenic risk factors, we're not going to get far if all we do is deal with the mental health. Right? All right, we are due for a break, so 15-minute break. All right. You were one of the first states, I believe, in the country to adopt the LSI back many, many years ago. So this state has a long history with assessment. I want to talk a little bit about kind of understanding risk factors, because I think it's less of an issue of what assessment tools you use than kind of what you do with them and understanding them. It's important to understand types of risk factors. We've already talked about kind of the two basic types, static ones and dynamic ones. Static are risk factors, that things related to risk that you can't really change. So if you have a criminal history, you've been arrested 5 times, right? That's a risk factor. I mean, you've done it before, you might do it again, but I can't really change it. It can only go up, it can't go down. Dynamic factors are those things related to risk, but we can change them, right? We can get people jobs, we can get them off of drugs and alcohol and so forth. But there are 2 types of dynamic risk factors. I think this gets overlooked, right? There are acute ones. These are things that can change quickly, right? What can change quickly with someone? Employment, right? You can get a job just like that. Right? Go out, interview on Friday, you start on Monday. They went from unemployed to employed. Check it off the box. But a lot of dynamic risk factors are stable. We're not going to change them overnight. I'm not going to make you less impulsive overnight. I'm not going to change your friends overnight. I'm not going to change how you think overnight. Those are dynamic. Why is it important? I think it's linked to 2 things. One, it's linked to dosage. It's linked to dosage, right? It takes some dosage to teach people how to be less impulsive. I don't know how much, right? But clearly it's related to that. And second, it's related to reassessment, right? You're not going to, we want to see these overnight changes in people, and we're not going to see it, and we can't expect that to show up in a reassessment. I cut this out of the paper years ago. It's the risk factors associated with the first heart attack, and I'm in training for one, so I've been brushing up on them. First 3 factors: family history, age, and gender. All good risk factors. They are static. If your father had a heart attack or your family history has heart, you can't change it. It's nothing you can do about it. If you're over 50, it's nothing you can do about it. You're male, right? Out of luck, right? Now we've got some dynamic ones. Inactive lifestyle, overweight, high blood pressure, smoking, high cholesterol, right? Those are dynamic. So if you have them all and you go to your physician, what are they going to have you work on? Dynamic ones, right? Does it mean you won't have a heart attack? No, you might still kill over, right? You see these joggers all the time die. That's why I don't exercise. But if, as a group, we reduced our cholesterol and high blood pressure and so forth, we could reduce heart attacks 20, 30%. That's what actuarial assessment's all about. Remember, not all low-risk people make it, not all high-risk people fail. Right? It's just the probability. It puts them in a group. If you look at this list, most of those are what? Stable, right? Probably the only one that's acute could be smoking. You could quit smoking like that. I don't know if the effects would go away like that, but you could quit smoking. There are people that quit smoking and never smoke again. But you're not going to lose weight or get your cholesterol down overnight. Those are going to take some time. But remember this, just because we can't change static factors doesn't mean they're not important, right? They're important. So if I used to be a drug addict and you've never been a drug addict, my risk is higher in that area than yours. I might have been clean for years. Doesn't matter. I have a history there, right? And he could start, but because of my history, I have an elevated risk there. It's one of the reasons, by the way, we almost never see people go from high to low. We see them go from high to moderate or moderate to low. We don't see them go high to low because they've got those static risk factors there. All right. Dynamic factors are more difficult to measure. This is why with assessment tools like the LSI and the ORAS, you have to have training, you have to look at reliability, you have to invest in it. Right now, there's a lot of folks going to machine scored assessments. I think it has some advantage, but I think that the disadvantages outweigh the advantages. I think if you're going to do the program, if all you want to do is risk, then the machine scored tools are probably going to get you there quicker. But if you want to do a case plan and treatment and know this person, I don't think there's any substitute for interviewing them and getting that information, right? These are some tools that are out there, the LSI, the psychopathy checklist, Compass. We have a new system in Ohio. This is an LSIR. Most of you are familiar with this. I want to use this for an example, okay? This is someone who is high risk, happens to be a woman. She's high risk in criminal history. She is very high risk in companions. She's high risk in alcohol, emotional, and attitudes and orientation. So she's high risk. She's firing on a bunch of cylinders. All right? So if you reduced her substance abuse, she now low risk? No, she's not. Who's going to pick her up from the program, by the way? That tells you everybody she knows gets in trouble, right? So what I want you to see is how related these risk factors are. They're not in isolation. Just because you reduce her substance abuse, she's not going to be a low-risk offender. She's still got a lot of things to work on. This is the psychopathy checklist. You women recognize these from traits from men you dated over the years. This is a tool kind of used mostly for psychopathy. That's what I would use it for, probably not much else. This is the Compass. In Ohio, we developed a whole new system. Pre-trial, we have a new misdemeanor assessment, community supervision. Colorado is using the prison intake and the reentry tools. We have two reentry tools, one for long-term inmates, one for short-term. So Colorado is using some of it. I don't know if they call it the ORAS or the Colorado RAS, or in Texas it's the TRAS. I can't let Utah use it though. It'd be your ass if they use it. So we're not going to let them use it. This is what they see in Ohio. They get a speedometer with the risk. This is what the judges get for the supervision tool, because we wanted to make it simple for them to read and understand, and then it has all the risk factors. Even a judge can figure that out. So let's talk about the treatment principle and responsivity. And we'll get into a little dig down a little bit here since we have some time. There's two basic types of responsivity as identified by Andrews and Bona. There's specific responsivity and there's general responsivity. General responsivity is the idea that most people respond to behavioral interventions, social learning-based, cognitive-based interventions. The specific is that people learn differently and have different barriers that need to be addressed so they can succeed in programs. The idea of responsivity is if you can assess some of these barriers or learning styles, you can increase the effectiveness of your treatment programs, right? That's the idea. And think about it as what gets in the way? What gets in the way, right? Learning styles, other barriers, right? These are things that get in the way. Right? Anybody know that the feds did have a new assessment tool called the PICRA, and they looked at barriers. You know what the #1 barrier they found was with their offenders? Transportation. That's their #1 barrier, right? And then there were others after that, language and so forth. But #1 was transportation, right? I mean, we make them go to all these places. We take their driver's license away from them, so it gets a little tough. But these are some areas that to consider looking at, right? These are common ones. Motivation. Motivation can be a barrier. Don't confuse it with risk factor, though. People make that mistake. It's not a risk factor. It's a barrier. I'm motivated to do a lot of things I don't know how to do. Just because I want to do it doesn't mean I have the skill. Okay? I wake up every morning motivated. I have the same 3 goals every day. Lose weight, get in shape, treat people better. Those are my goals. I had a big buffet breakfast this morning. I'm not going to exercise today. I'm too tired. As for treating people better, there's always tomorrow. Okay? Kind of leaks out of me all day long. But I'll be motivated again in the morning. It's very dynamic, by the way. It's very dynamic. It's almost I see all this effort we put into motivational interviewing and stuff. I think how dynamic it is. Offenders can be motivated for one thing and not for another. They're motivated to get a job, not to go to drug treatment. Right? I mean, it is a very dynamic concept. Anxiety, level of psychological development, maturity, cognitive functioning, right? Mental health. These are all things that can get in the way. So what do we have to do? We have to assess them. With the ORAS, for example, on the case plan, the assessor identifies the responsivity factors. So if the guy has low literacy or there's no support for treatment at home, whatever it is, and every time the case plan shows up, the officer's reminded of those responsivity factors because we want to keep it at the forefront, right? This is a guy that reads at a 3rd grade level, right? You can't put him in this kind of a program and so forth. Remember this, criminogenics reduce risk, non-criminogenics reduce barriers, but not risk. I think too many times we spend all of our efforts on the barriers and we never get around to the risk factors. Okay? And so it's actually not a bad idea. You assess somebody, you list their 3 major risk factors, and you list their barriers or even their assets, right? Because you have to think about what's getting in the way. All right, I want you to take a minute. I want you to think of 3 speeches that have changed your life, not including this one. Okay. 3 speeches that have changed your life. Okay, that's enough time. Most of you can't do it anyway. Anybody got 3 speeches? Who's got a speech? You got 3 going. That's good.
Really?
What do you got?
Well, they all 3 came from my dad.
They're all happy you have them, yeah, so. Yeah, dads aren't the same, though, but go on, yeah.
I've gotten 3 speeches from my dad. One was about never bite the hand that feeds you.
Yeah.
The other was about go for, act as if you have the job you want.
Yeah.
And follow your head, not your heart.
All right, very good. Well, but from anybody else, that wouldn't have made any difference, yeah, because it was your dad. You've answered the second question, actually. But all right, anybody else got speeches that changed their life? What's that? Tear down this wall. Did you go help them? Did you? No, I'm just kidding. So, yeah, tear down this wall. Any others? Huh? John F. Kennedy, asked not. People heard that speech and joined the Peace Corps or devoted themselves to public service. Martin Luther King, right? I had a dream. People thought about race or hope differently, right? Powerful speeches, right?
Donald Trump's inaugural address.
Yeah, that stuck with you. Changed your life? Yes, he did. We're all screwed. Yeah, no, I'm just kidding you. It's hard to think of speeches that change our life. We can think of powerful speeches, and but I know I can't think of speeches. So I got another question. 3 people that have changed your life. Now you named one already, All right, it was your dad. Who do you have? Who are the people that you have? The people that changed your life?
My dad.
Your dad? Teacher? Anybody else? Coach? Huh? What do you got? Who you got? Were you born in a cabbage patch? You didn't have anybody?
I can't think of anyone in particular. Teacher.
Teacher? Parents? Grandparents? Aunt? Uncle? Spouse? Your wife. You know what? I had a guy the other day had 3 ex-wives that changed his life. All right? He said he wasn't getting married again. He was just finding a woman that hated him and buying her a house. Yeah. Your children, they change your life. A boss, a mentor at work, professor. Who are the people that you wanted to be like? Why are you doing what you're doing? Who influenced you? What I'm trying to get you to see is how much more powerful social learning is than talk therapy. You think they're offenders because they never got any good advice. No, they never got any good advice from you. That's why they're offenders, right? If you think about, right, and social learning it's the process through which we acquire our attitudes and our values and our beliefs. It's the strongest theory we have to explain who we are and why we behave the way we do. It is not a theory of criminal behavior. It's a theory of human behavior, right? It is a complex process, not a complex concept. It's an easy concept. How many of you have children? And how many of you turned into your parents when you had children, right? You turned into your mother, right? Last person you were going to be at 14 was probably your mother or father, right? I know it. My 4 are grown, but my youngest said once, she's a parent, she's going to let her kids do whatever they want. I said, you go right ahead, Allie, you just be home at 10 o'clock, right? Turned into my dad, right? Said things I swore I'd never say, right? You're born in a barn, think money grows on trees? I'll give you something to cry about. That was always my favorite one. I said to my son once, I said, Michael, do I look like Rockefeller? He said, who the hell is this Rockefeller guy? I said, I'm sorry, do I look like Bill Gates? But that's what my dad used to say to me, right? That's a powerful magnet. We turn into our parents, even though when we're teenagers, we're never going to do that, right? That's social learning. Problem with social learning is we don't just learn good things from other people, do we? We learn bad things from other people, right? And so when we talk about the treatment principle, what we're really talking about is behavioral interventions. The category of behavioral interventions, they have some attributes. First, they focus on current factors that influence our behavior. What are current factors? You're not going to work. You get high all the time. You think what you do is okay. You're hanging around with people that get into trouble, right? Those are current risk factors versus what? The past. We spend a lot of time sometimes talking about the past. Here's the problem. You can't change the past. Sometimes it's a barrier. Sometimes somebody suffers from trauma or something that gets in the way, but it's a barrier. It might help explain why they're sitting there. It may, right? They may have been abused as a kid. They may have had all kinds of other things happen to them. It certainly can explain. But this work is very here and now focused. What do I have to do to help you be successful so you won't come back here again? And to do that, you have to focus on current risk factors. Second, it is action-oriented, not talk-oriented. What do I mean by that? I mean that they are active learners. They are actively participating, practicing, rehearsing. Okay. Too many times we lecture them or we let them tell war stories. Right? I hear that over and over again, right? Or reinforcing each other. No, very directive approach. I'm gonna talk to you tonight about impulsivity. Anybody ever act impulsively? Yeah, a few of them will say, yeah. How about if I showed you some ways maybe next time you could get out of that, right? It might help you a little bit. Then we practice it, and everybody get a chance, right? And what I'm trying to do is get them actively involved in learning those new skills, right? By the way, it's a myth that they don't have skills. They have a lot of skills. Lying, cheating, stealing, using drugs. They're good at that. Better at that than you ever be, right? Those are skills. We're trying to teach them what? Pro-social alternatives to those skills. And staff follow some core correctional practices. We used to just call these behavioral strategies. Now we call them core correctional practices. I'll talk about them in a minute. Why behavioral interventions? Much stronger treatment effects. Non-behavioral interventions, things like education, drug education. Take a bunch of offenders that use drugs and educate them about it. Right? It's really a dumbass idea when you think about it. Every prison I go to, drug education. It's easy, it's cheap, they can run the groups, right? Take a bunch of violent offenders and teach them the wheel of violence, right? Those are not ways to teach people new skills. Non-behavioral could be things like talk therapy, insight, right? Have them develop some insight into their behavior, right? They're not very insightful, right? And again, we'll go back to what I said before. If you needed some help or you wanted to learn something, how might I go about doing it? Well, I could scare you and threaten you. I could educate you, or I could coach you. I could show you how, and we could practice it. And if you did it right, I'd reinforce you. If you did it wrong, I'd stop you and show you the right way to do it. That's a behavioral intervention. These are the most common models that we see in adults. Now, if we were talking juveniles, I'd have another one up there. I'd have family-based interventions, because that's much more widely used in the juvenile system. For adults, it's mostly structured social learning and cognitive behavioral approaches. Right? These are the principles of COG, that thinking affects behavior, that antisocial, distorted, unproductive thinking leads to antisocial and unproductive behavior. We can change. Thinking can be influenced, and we can change how we feel and behave by changing what we think. Again, it is a complex problem. It's not a complex, it's an easy concept to see how our thinking relates to our behavior, right? So you leave here and you're going back wherever you're from, and I think, as I recall, the speed limit's 70, right, in this state, right? How much? 75. Holy shit, 75. So you're going back and it's 75 and you're doing 85. You're going 10 miles over the speed limit, right? What are some of the thoughts you have that allow you to go to break the law? Everybody else is doing it. Yeah. What else? What's that? Just a guideline. Yeah, the speed limit's just a guideline. There you go. Yeah. What else?
It's an open stretch.
It's a big state, open stretch, safe driver, sun's out, I'm a good driver, right? There's one. Why are you doing 85, not 105? It's 10 over, right? I'm in the 10-mile limit, right? So I'm in a 10-mile limit. Everybody's doing it. I'm a good driver. I'm in a hurry, right? Want to get home. So there's an egocentric one, right? So we've got a bunch of thoughts that allow us to what? Break the law. Everybody's doing it. That law is, it's not that great a law anyway. I'm in a hurry. I'm in the 10-mile limit, right? So we have a few thoughts that are allowing us to speak. All right, there you go, and you're not paying attention, and you go by the Colorado State Highway Patrol. What is your first thought as you blow by? Oh shit, that's your first thought. You know what? Nobody's thinking I'm in the 10-mile limit anymore, are you? No, you're not sure what the limit is anymore, right? What else are you thinking as you go by? Huh? Hope what? You've already given up. You think you're getting caught, yeah? What are most of us hoping?
Maybe he didn't know.
Hope he didn't see me, right? Hope he sees who? The other guy, yeah. Some of us are thinking of excuses, right? Some of us are saying, sliding your badge over the license, if you're in law enforcement, right? All right, lights go on. It's quota week. He's writing you a ticket. What are some of you thinking as he starts to write that ticket? What? That's not the first thing I'm thinking. Huh? Why me? I'm not quite there yet.
How can I get out of it?
That may be. You know what I'm thinking? hole. That's what I'm thinking, right? I'm thinking, why, right? You're shaking your head, right? That's what you're thinking. Why me? I'm only going 10 miles over, right? How do we see ourselves, by the way? Victim. We got cut out of the herd, right? We're unlucky. That's how we see ourselves. He got us and not the other guy that went by at 90, right? We're blaming him. We see ourselves as unlucky. What else are we thinking? How much it's going to cost, right? We're thinking all that. By the way, offenders think just like this, just different behavior. Everybody does it. I got caught. What's the big deal? Who do they blame when they get caught? Huh? They blame the cops, right? It's the first thing they blame, right? And then what do they think, right? Do they say that they're sorry they did it? No, they're sorry they got caught. They should have, they're unlucky. Right? Should have went a different way or whatever it was. Right? All right, so you got your ticket. You're 30 miles down the road. You look down at your speedometer. You're doing 85 again. What are some thoughts that allow you to speed again? Can't happen twice. There's one. Yeah, lightning doesn't strike twice. Now I'm really late. You know what I always think? I'll be a smarter speeder. Right? I won't daydream. I'll get behind somebody with a radar detector, right? I'll outwit them. That's what I always think, right? And by the way, if it's not 30 miles, it's the next day or the next week, so you didn't even pay the ticket yet and you're speeding. All right, what are some thoughts that might get you to slow down a little bit? What's a thought that might get you to back off the pedal? Safety, there's one. Insurance, cost, got to tell my spouse. Points on my license. How about I want to be a good role model for my kids, right? They see me driving fast. How about it is the law? None of you thought of that. I like that, right? The point is, this is what we call a cognitive restructuring problem. It doesn't involve any skill. Anybody can back off the pedal. To get you to change your behavior here, all I have to do is get you to see it differently. Right? It's not that safe. You didn't save time. It cost you more money, right? I mean, it's not worth it kind of thing. Most problems aren't that easy. I have to change your thoughts and I have to show you how. That's why cognitive and behavioral, not just cognitive. This is a study looking at meta-analysis. They found on average 50% reduction or 25% reductions, but the most effective configurations found 50% reductions. What are those configurations? First, 2 sessions a week. What is that? Dosage. That's the risk principle. Second, implementation monitored and staff were trained. What is that? Fidelity. Third, higher proportion of completers. That's specific responsivity. They can't complete if they can't get there. They can't complete if they don't understand what you're trying to teach them, right? So you have to take those barriers away. Higher risk, there's the risk principle, and higher if it's combined with other services. Remember the need principle. The more criminogenic areas you target, the greater the effect. What I'm trying to get you to see is, you want to use COG, I could show you the research on family interventions. It shows the same thing. You get stronger effects when target high risk, target criminogenic, do it well, use behavioral approaches. So that's what I'm trying to get you to see. Here's some different curriculums out there. ART, very popular. This is one, criminal conduct and substance abuse, that Milkman developed. He's down there in Denver. A lot of people use Thinking for a Change. We've got some new ones. We got one for cognitive employment for employment. This is one that Morgan developed, Changing Offender Lives. That's specifically for mentally disordered offenders. It's non-proprietary. He has a restriction though. He will only train licensed mental health staff. We have a new substance abuse. There's a moving on for females. We have a big sex offender curriculum. And this is one we just developed for the Council of State Governments, a comprehensive curriculum. It is adaptable to mentally disordered offenders. So we have worksheets for mentally disordered offenders. So these are just some of the ones out there, curriculums that are out there. Research indicates it really matters, which curriculum you use matters less than how well you do it. All right. These are core correctional practices: effective reinforcement, effective disapproval, effective use of authority, quality relationships, cognitive restructuring, anti-criminal modeling, structured learning and skill building, and problem-solving techniques. All staff should have these skills. They should all have these skills. Why? Data shows, use these core correctional practices, we see stronger effects across the board. Okay. Let me show you a couple studies now. This is a study a guy named Whitall did looking at reinforcement. Why is this important? We always tell people you need to have the application of positive reinforcers and negative reinforcers. The standard is at least 4 to 1. Most of that research has been done by psychology. This is the first study to look at, in this case, probationers. First study ever to look at probationers, right? And so this is what he found. As the ratio increased, there's 4 to 1 right over here. As the ratio increased of positive reinforcers to negative reinforcers, look at the completion rate. I mean, that's a steep curve. Right? Once it hit 4 to 1, dramatic increases. What were the sanctions? Reprimand, written assignment, curfew, community service, restricted visitation, electronic monitoring, detention time. What were the rewards? Verbal praise, removal from electronic monitoring, level advancement, and so forth. It was the application, 4 to 1. One of my former students is the deputy director in Harris County Community Corrections, which is Houston. It's the 4th biggest city in the country. He has 1,000 POs. He runs all the facilities, and he's now giving his staff iPads, and they keep track of all their metrics, and whenever they reinforce people, they keep track of them because he wants to have all this. He wants to see how much they do it, but he also wants to have data. One of the things he learned when he started doing it was the staff, because it's not just rewarding the offenders, by the way, it's rewarding your staff. You want to shape their behavior, you have to do the same thing for them. And the staff all loved wearing blue jeans on Friday, right? And so he gave his managers coupons. And he said, all right, whenever staff are doing good things, give them a coupon, they can wear blue jeans on Friday, right? So they had a monthly meeting, and he said, okay, how many did you give out? And they said 8. And he said, 8? I gave out 72, right? Well, what he found was they didn't know how to reinforce the staff. Because nobody was showed them, and nobody was reinforcing them. And so he had to start thinking differently about how to reinforce the staff because the managers weren't able to do it. And he had to train them on how to do it because, right, the staff will respond to it. They were responding to it if it was done. Whitall did another study, sanction type by offender compliance. Offenders don't comply, what do? Well, there's lots of things we can do, but oftentimes we give them jail therapy, right? We send them to jail for a while, dirty urine, didn't show up, what have you. He looked at offenders on intensive supervision and the effectiveness of jail time versus community-based sanctions. These were the sanctions, all right? He compared these to county jail time. So all those things up there, the jail time, what did he find? Jail time was not related to the number of days until the next violation. It did not increase or decrease the number of subsequent violations, and receiving jail time as a sanction, as opposed to a community-based sanction, did not influence successful completion of supervision. In other words, they got the same effect by using less expensive interventions than jail. By the way, this is a state, it's pretty close to here, Wyoming. Okay? So it's not like it's some, greatly liberal state, out there. It's a pretty rural state, as you know, but that's what they found in his study in Wyoming. So I just wanted you to see that. All right. Some of you are familiar with epics. Little history. Epics, Jim Vaughan wrote an article called Inside the Black Box of Supervision. And the question was, what happens in those sessions? And I think the same applies to groups and programs. I've assessed hundreds of programs, and I can watch a group. I can sit and watch a group, I can see how they do it, but every program always says, well, we do individual work as well. Right? How many of you in your programs have individual sessions, right? How do you know what goes on in those individual sessions, right? Yeah, how do you know? All right. And the ones you don't sit in? Yeah, yeah. And you sitting in is better than some never sit in, right? And so the question really is, well, what's being done? And how's it being done? And he wrote this article, and the question to me was, to be honest, it's not that hard to design a program, especially a residential program, jail, prisons, I've done all that. You know, you have a captive audience, you get a space, you train the staff, you get a schedule, you put a behavioral management system in place. To me, the challenge was always, how do I teach POs and parole officers and case managers how to use this work one-on-one, right? One-on-one. How do you do that? And so Bontas found some things, and we have found some things. First of all, he said that the interactions were often not effective. One, they were too brief. Second, conversations focused almost exclusively on external control and conditions. You will do it because. If you don't do it, these are the things that will happen to you. In fact, some sessions, all they do every session is go over the conditions again. Right? Third, relationship was often more confrontational than helpful, authoritarian. Fourth, what they targeted wasn't always based on the assessment. And last, the more things they talked about, the less effective they were. Right? So you got 10 minutes with somebody, you're trying to cram in as much as you can, they don't remember it, and maybe the last thing, right? So we got this data that says, you know, we can do a better job. So we came up with epics. The first thing we did was structure the session, right? Because we found that these sessions were all over the map. Right? Sometimes they were real structured, and other times it was like, you know, you don't know what they were talking about. So there are 4 steps. I'm going to show you a tape here in a minute, and you're going to see these 4 steps. You're going to see the check-in. The check-in is where the case manager, in this case the PO, reviews, right, looks for any crisis, because if there's a crisis, everything's off, right? Go through some of the things that the person needs to do. Then you're going to see the review. The review is, let's talk about what we worked on last time. Then you're going to see the intervention. Then you're going to see, very brief, the homework. 4 steps. This whole session takes about 13 minutes. So I want you to see how much she gets done in 13 minutes with this. Now, this is what we call a skill building session. And here's why. Charles, who just got out of a residential facility, he was locked up for about 6 months. He went through Thinking for a Change, went through programming. Right? He gets it. He doesn't want to go back. Right? Cognitively, he gets it. His cognitions are appropriate, right? His problem is he doesn't know what to do. He gets in a situation and he makes a bad decision. He didn't have the skill. Now, had Charles come into the session and said to her, what's the big deal? I want to go out partying? It's my business. Then she would have done a cognitive restructuring with him. But because Charles gets it, she's going to work on the skill building. So we're going to watch this. It's pretty quick.
Good morning. Thank you for coming in today, Charles. I really appreciate it.
How you doing today?
Good. I also want to say thank you for being on time. I know that every time you come in, you're on time, and I just want to let you know that really helps our day go well here because we have clients after clients, and it's nice to see you here. It's nice to see you on time.
I try to do what I can.
Thank you. I want to just check in with you a little bit since our last session, see if there's anything new that's going on.
Yeah, just a little something about the homework that I had to do for
Okay.
you.
Well, let's hang on that. Let me check with a few other things, and then we'll get right into that homework.
Okay.
Any problems at work?
No, everything's splendid right there.
Everything's splendid there?
Yeah,
That's good to hear.
I'm glad I'm working.
Good, I bet you are. What about family?
Everything's cool. Mama's okay. Father's okay.
Okay, that's good. Any problems with drugs or alcohol since the last visit?
Nah, not actually.
Okay. And you're working, so I'm sure you're paying your fines and taking care of all that business
Oh
too.
yeah, I just made a drop off right now.
Excellent. All right, very good. So let's talk about that homework a little bit here.
Yeah, here you go.
Let's see. All right, so we definitely have a situation to talk about, huh?
Yeah, it was stressful.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about the external piece, the situation?
Well, it was since I've been out, I really ain't seen too many of my friends lately. So one of them all of a sudden just popped up. I don't know how he found out I was out because I ain't call him or nothing.
Where'd you see him at?
He came to my house.
Oh, so he knocked on the door.
Yeah.
That definitely goes against your plan to avoid everyone, huh?
Mm-hmm.
So tell me what you were thinking when he knocked on the door.
Well, I'm like, how did he know I was even out? That's what I was thinking at first, because I looked through the peephole. I'm like, how he know I was even home? I'm like, he always peer pressure me too. I don't like this friend right here for real, because he always trying to peer pressure me to do something. Even when I told him that I'm not doing that addictive behavior no more.
So you were thinking, what am I gonna do?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what choice did you make?
I opened the door and hollered at him, and we had a nice little conversation talking about the old days.
Yeah.
So he done peer pressured me once again, and I done went to the bar. It was smoke everywhere. He tried to get me to drink, but I ain't drink, but it was still a crazy situation that I really ain't want to be in.
Yeah. Sounds like you did well by not drinking, but you also put yourself at risk
Heavy risk.
by going to the bar with him.
And all the smoke around probably could have got in my system. So if I got a dirty pee, you know, I just told you why.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that. We'll definitely have you drop the urine after this, and we'll kind of
Okay,
see where that goes.
that's
But
cool.
let's talk a little bit more about when he was kind of at the door and those thoughts you were having that led up to you deciding to open the door for him. You know, some of those thoughts were, man, how did he find me? How did I get here?
Mm-hmm.
But there were certainly some other thoughts that must have influenced you to
Just
open
thinking about, we childhood friends, so I really could not open the door and holler at him.
Okay.
Then I was just thinking about some of the old days, good times we had. So I figured going to the bar wouldn't want to be too bad as long as I don't smoke or drink, even though it could be a trigger.
So those memories, those thoughts of the old days were kind of some powerful reasons why you decided to go to the bar. You still didn't want to get in trouble, so it sounds like you were trying to manage the situation.
Yes.
Since you couldn't avoid it since he was right there.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Hopefully that urine comes back clean. As you
Yeah.
said, you didn't smoke, you didn't drink, so that is good news. But, you know, this isn't going to be the last time that he probably comes knocking on the door, is it?
No.
No. So what are we
He
going to
said
do?
he gonna call me in a couple of days.
Uh-oh.
Might have to change my number.
So you already know he plans on trying to hang out with you again.
Mm-hmm.
So what I want to maybe talk with you about today is what we can do when he calls back, or maybe someone else shows up on the porch, or kind of, you know, some other high-risk situations from your friends that might just kind of fall into place like this one did. And we can talk a little bit about what you can do in those situations.
Okay.
Would you be willing to talk about that?
Sure.
Okay. What I have is one of the skills that maybe you learned in River City, or, you know, kind of like those skills, I should say, that you learned in River City with the active listening, giving feedback. There's a skill that falls into dealing with friends called avoiding trouble with others. And I'd like to just talk a little bit about, you know, how you can use that skill to maybe help deal with situations like this so that you don't end up at the bar. Because, you know, this time you made a good choice once you got to the bar, but what if we can backtrack and avoid the bar altogether?
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about avoiding friends that can get you into trouble, or avoiding trouble with your friends, what might be one of the first decisions that you have to make?
First, just tell him that I'm not doing that no more, basically.
So
And if
before you even tell him, it sounds like to me you need to decide if being with him or doing that thing could get you into trouble.
Right.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
So you need to first make a decision, hey, this could get me into trouble?
Yeah.
Would you mind writing that down so we can kind of keep a step-by-step process of how to do that? So once you decide if this could get you into trouble, the next question is, I know it can get me into trouble, or it might not get me into trouble, but do I want to avoid it? Because it sounds to me like in that situation when your buddy showed up at the door, you recognized, oh man, here we go again. You know, I know this can't work out or for the good, but yet, what happened?
I still went with him.
Still went with him. So we need something in there to decide, do I really want to make the different choice? Do I want to get out of this situation? So you think we could try that after that first step?
Yeah, we can try.
Okay, so let's maybe say, you know, is this the situation that could get me into trouble? And then next step, do I want to get out of this situation? Decide that. And then if you make the choice, I don't want to go to the bar, I don't want to get into trouble. Do you think it's important to tell that other person that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so do you think that'd be the next logical step? Tell that other person what you decided?
Yes.
Okay. And then sometimes people like to hear other suggestions. I mean, maybe you do want to hang out with your buddy, but is the bar the best place to hang out?
No, I just gotta tell him whatever we go do, ain't no drugs and alcohol involved.
Okay, so maybe a safer place. Could you make some different suggestions to where those safe places might be?
It could be my house, for real, because my mother don't allow smoking in the house, so
Okay.
she's a church woman, so that really would be disrespectful to do that in there.
Sounds like it. Well, then that would be one definite suggestion, too. What if he doesn't want to hang out at your house, though?
Well, let me see. We could probably go out to eat or something.
Okay.
Probably like TGI Fried Longhorn or something at a no smoking section.
But what about the alcohol they serve?
Oh, okay. I ain't thinking about the alcohol because I really ain't never drunk alcohol in no restaurants.
That's okay. Just something to think about. When you think about the other suggestions, you want to make sure that they're going to help you meet your goal of not getting into trouble.
Let me see what we can do. I never really thought about it like that for real. I had to get some thought to it.
Well, for now, you have your house. He can come in and you guys can hang out there. But if he still says, nah, man, I don't want to hang out at your house, I want to go to the bar, and he's really pressuring you, if you're going to avoid trouble with him, what's the bottom line?
Bottom line is to not even deal with him.
Then you need to not go, right? You need to tell him, look, then you go to the bar, I'm going to stay here at my house. So kind of the last step is, even if he doesn't take your suggestion, whatever it may be, you need to kind of stand your ground and do what's best for you.
Right.
So if that means staying at home and letting him go, that might mean staying at home and letting him go. So you think the last step could be doing what's best for myself?
Yes, that gotta be because I can't afford to go back to jail.
Yeah, it's something to keep in the back of your mind there as you're going through these steps. Okay, so we've got some steps down here now. Any questions on those steps?
Actually, that really helped me out.
Okay, so do you think it would help even more if I maybe role played? If I could maybe show you what those steps would look like?
Yeah,
and then maybe
we can
you
try that.
can give it a try yourself?
Yeah, we can try that.
Okay, so how about I play Charles? I'll play you, and you play your buddy.
Okay.
Okay, and you're trying to talk me into coming out and hanging out at the bar, and I'll use these steps to get out of this situation.
Okay.
And you took Thinking for a Change, right?
Yes.
Did you use this to kind of identify when you're thinking?
Yes.
Do you mind if I do that to kind of help show you the steps?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So why don't you start it off by knocking on the door?
Okay. Knock, knock.
Oh, man, here we go. I know he ain't just show up on my doorstep like that. I've been telling him I've changed. Oh, he could get me into so much trouble. I don't know what to do. I obviously want to open the door. He's a childhood buddy of mine, but, oh, man. I know this situation's going to get me in trouble. I know I got to get out of this situation. I think I'm just going to tell him that, it's great to see him. He's more than welcome to come in and hang out, but if he tries to pull anything, asking me to go anywhere, I just can't do it. Hey, man, how's it going?
What's up, man? Why you ain't tell me you was out?
I'm just trying to keep it straight and narrow this time, trying to do what I got to do.
You know what time it is. It's time to go to the bar, man. You ready?
I'm more than happy to hang out with you. Why don't you come on in? We can just chill here.
Well, we can go chill at the bar.
You're right, we can
We
chill
can't
at
do
the
nothing
bar.
in your house.
You're right, we can chill at the bar, but I'm trying to keep it together, so I'm going to be hanging out in here. I'd love to hang out and catch up with you if you want to come on in, but I can't go to the bar.
Oh, you gonna do me like that all these years?
It is what it is, bro. I'm sorry.
All right, I'm gonna call you tomorrow, man. I got something to talk to you about.
All right.
All right.
So what do you think?
That was excellent.
Well, thank you. So you think you can give it a try?
Mm-hmm.
Same situation, but you walk through the steps this time?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So I'll come knocking on your door. I'll be your friend. And this time you have to kind of go through your thoughts and figure out what the best thing to do is. You can make the suggestion of hanging out inside. And then remember just to do what's best for you.
Mm-hmm. Look through the peephole. Oh, here he go. Oh, what is he doing? I even know I was out. I've been trying to change, now he's trying to come peer pressure me. I already know what he about to do. I can't get in trouble right now. I'm on probation. I got too much at stake right now. And I got a good job going. I got to tell him no, because that ain't the way to go no more. I got to do what's best for me anyway. What's up, bro?
Hey, where you been?
Man, I've been working.
Working?
Yeah.
Why, you haven't called, you haven't seen anything, we haven't even celebrated you being out.
I can't do that no more.
What do you mean you can't do that? Bar's right around the corner, everybody's there, let's head on up there.
That's too much addictive behavior. I can't be around that no more.
So what you want to do? You gonna leave me hanging?
Nah, I ain't gonna leave you hanging. We can chill in my house or something. Other than that, I gotta go to work in the morning.
You chill at your house?
Yeah, that's about it right now. I can watch my nephew anyway.
All right, I'm all right with that.
Okay. See you in a minute.
All right. So what do you think?
I think that's really worked out pretty well.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Would you be able to try it outside of our office here in the session we just had?
You can do something. You can
Yeah.
try.
Well, what if, I know we have to meet again next week. I think we're meeting next Thursday again at 1 o'clock. So if we're going to meet again next Thursday, do you think you might have an opportunity to try that from now until then?
Oh yeah, because he mess around and go probably come to my house once again.
All right. Well, why don't you give that a try? And once he does that, give me a call.
Okay.
I know we're going to meet Thursday, but give me a call and let me know between then how it went. And then just in case it pops up again before we meet, we can kind of problem solve on the spot.
Okay, that's man.
All right. Thanks. Good to see you again.
You too.
She get a lot done in 13 minutes. And what's the first thing she did when he showed up? Thanked him for being on time, right? And told him why it was important to be on time. So that increases the likelihood that he'll be on time in the future, because now he understands they get backed up and it's important. She went through the steps with him. Did she stop at that point? By the way, she used her authority too. She wasn't authoritarian, but she said, well, we'll drop a urine and see where it goes from here, right? So he's going to have to drop a urine. So she's letting him know that, that's not going to slide. She didn't stop after she went through the steps, did she? She did what with him? She practiced. Are you better at things when you practice? And notice at first he couldn't think of any other excuses, right? After his restaurant thing kind of went south. But he did when he practiced, right? What did he say? I got to go to work tomorrow and I got to watch my nephew. So he thought of some things that he might not have thought of if he didn't give the opportunity to practice. So what you saw was really those core correctional practices put into a structure. Now we've been doing a lot of work with probation and parole, including here. So here's some data from Canada. They had 12% higher retention rates and some reductions in recidivism. That's with the Canadian model. This is with federal probation. They've been doing it at all their districts. This is what they have found. This is what we found in Ohio. And there's now enough research for a meta-analysis. And so basically it finds about a 13 or 14% reduction. EPICS is not designed to replace programs. It's designed to support programs and to use officers as agents of change. Right? It's not for everybody, it's for higher risk. So I got in this situation out in California. I was asked to design a jail reentry program in Los Angeles. LA is the biggest jail in the country. They have 17,000 inmates or so in their jail facility, so it's massive. And they wanted to do a jail reentry program. The problem was the men, we were only doing men. The men coming out of jail were not under supervision. So they're getting released from jail with no supervision, right? The research indicates that we can get effects from institutional programs, prison programs and jail. You can get effects, but they're not nearly as strong if you don't have something when they come out, right? That really makes the difference. And so I had to figure out a way to help these men without having probation officers. So I came up with this idea and called it effective practices for community support, not correctional supervision, but community support for influencers. Remember the Pennsylvania study? They found that people that made it had somebody they could go to. And so the idea is to identify the people in the offender's life that want to help them and train them on some of these core practices. Okay? The problem, one of the challenges I have is there's a constant recruiting of influencers. Constant, right? How many people come out of prison in Colorado or jail in Colorado every day, right? Hundreds. And so I needed a way to do this. I couldn't train all the influencers. So what we do is we recruit coaches. And the coaches recruit and train the influencers. Okay? Why? Because I want to build a network of pro-social people with some actual skills. The problem with mentors is most of that research shows minimal effect. Because we don't give them any skills. We just tell them, be their friend. And it's not effective. I want to increase the dosage. Okay. Anybody in here working probation or parole? How many times you see an offender? Well, how many times a month? And highest level? 4. 4 times a month. How long do you see them when you see them? Be generous. Huh? 15 minutes. All right, so you see them an hour a month. How many hours are in a month? A hell of a lot more than 1, right? So even if you doubled it, if you tripled it, right, it's still a drop in the bucket, right? And so the question was, how do we get you more dosage with supervision without increasing what you do? Because you can't. You have a caseload and you have to meet it. So the idea is, now imagine if you had, you're seeing the offender 4 times a month, but every time he sees his uncle or somebody else in his life, they're also doing an intervention with him. They're working with them on a risky situation, right? So I've increased the dosage, right? Research shows that relapse prevention, that train significant others and family members in cognitive behavioral approaches are 3 times more effective, right? Who are these? They're mentors, they're coaches, they're family members, friends, faith-based organizations, reentry coalitions, law enforcement, school officials, and significant others, right? We pretty much will train anybody that wants to be trained. I've got 4 pilot sites now. I got LA, I got Hamilton County, that's Cincinnati. I got a juvenile one, and I got a new one starting with the halfway house in Columbus. Elvis House is a big, big halfway house, and we're training their case managers. So their case managers will recruit the influencers, and they will then train the influencers to work with the people in the halfway house. I knew I was on to something in LA because when we did the first training, one of the mothers who was going to be an influencer offered to give me money. Right? And I said, why are you giving me money? She said, because no one's ever no one's ever taught me how to help my son before. And I knew I was on to something. In Portsmouth, which is it's the bottom of Ohio, it's a very poor area, they want to do it for their juveniles. And when we went to meet with them, law enforcement was in the room. And law enforcement said, well, we want to be trained. And I said, why? And they said, well, we do after-school programs with kids. We do resource officers in schools. And we don't know what to do. We don't have the skills. Some officers are good, some of them aren't. And so that's when I realized pretty much anybody that wants to get involved. So we have, like I said, 4 pilot studies. 2 of them are part of big studies, so we'll know more in probably a year or so how effective it is. There are challenges. The challenges is not in identifying influencers. In the Hamilton County one, I hired the coaches and a husband and wife who were doing some volunteer work in the jail. And he happens to be a former Bengal. His name's David Fulcher. He was a safety back in the 80s, and he's very well thought of. He's a big guy. The inmates all give him names. It's the influencers. A lot of them are done with them. You know, they're like, I'm done with them. You know, I've tried to help them before, and so we really have been working to get influencers. Now we're starting to get more mentors. We're trying to identify mentors for them. But that's been our challenge, is getting them to stick with it. All right, so what doesn't work? Lakota tribal wisdom says when you discover you're riding a dead horse, the best strategy is to dismount. However, in corrections, we try other strategies, including the following: buy a stronger whip, change riders, say things like, this is the way we have always ridden this horse, appoint a committee to study the horse, visit other sites to see how they ride dead horses, create a training session to increase our riding ability, harness several dead horses together for increased speed, declare no horse is too dead to beat, provide additional funding to increase the horse's performance, declare the horse is better, faster, and cheaper dead, study alternative uses for dead horses, and promote the dead horse to a supervisory position. We've talked about most of these already. I'm not going to belabor them, but programs that cannot maintain fidelity, I think the work here to try to improve fidelity is critical. We never see I don't care what model they use, if there isn't strong fidelity to the model, we don't see effects. In fact, we see negative effects. In our study in Ohio, we found that COG programs that were poorly done were worse than not doing them at all. If you don't do them all, you just get no effect. If you do them badly, you get negative effects. Non-directive approaches, give them books to read, vague unstructured rehab programs. Let me say something about that for a minute, because I think, I get a lot of programs and they'll say, well, we do counseling. What the hell does that mean? I mean, give me 5 counselors, I'll give you 5 approaches. Here's one for you. Life skills. What could you exclude in life skills? Nothing, right? It tells me, it's a vague term. It tells me nothing about what you are doing. I can tell you what I do when I get a program that says they do life skills. I get the curriculum out, I start going through and marking the things that are criminogenic, the things that aren't. I want to see what they're targeting, right? Some of those life skills are appropriate, right? But it's vague. And it's the same with a lot of programs. You need to develop detailed descriptions of your programs, what you target, how you do it, how you monitor staff, your quality assurance. And here's the reason I'll give you for doing it. Because when you hire new staff, if you don't have that program description and that program model, you know what they're delivering? The last place they worked. Okay? It behooves you to have in place detailed manuals and about your program. How do you reinforce behavior? What are the reinforcers? Train your staff on it. And hell, get together with your staff and talk about what you can give clients, right? It varies by setting. In a prison and jail, they can't use the same reinforcers you can use in the community, right? You have a lot more reinforcers, but don't assume your staff know what they are unless you're starting to put this down in writing and develop. And it's a document, it takes time and it evolves, but if you don't, I can guarantee you have a lot of turnover in your community corrections agencies, and those people are doing whatever, or they're doing whatever the guy next to them tells them to do, and that may not be the right thing. So really stress that. You really should be doing that. Put together some detailed manuals. Fidelity, as I said before, is really the toughest to maintain. Some tips: you can do group observations, you can do peer reviews, you can do audits, just routine things to make sure your program's being delivered the way you want it to. You can assess them. Your state's coming up with a way. There are other ways. You do group observation. You want reports. You want to see, here's what they ask the program. Send you their program description. See how detailed it is. All right? Ask them questions. How do you vary dosage by risk? If they say to you, what's risk? Then you're in trouble, right? But in a big area like of Colorado Springs or Denver, you got lots of programs. But if you're in a small county, you only have 1 or 2 providers, it's all the more important that they do it well. And it means you work with them, you get them technical assistance, you help them get there because you got no options, right? I mean, you have to get them there. But if you don't know, and that's true with probation. Probation sends people to programs all the time. They don't have a clue what they're doing, all right? And I'm going to say this, poorly designed, poorly implemented treatment programs hurt good programs. Because I can tell you what judges say. Hell, I tried treatment, it didn't work. I sent them to that program. They never blamed the program, right? They always blame the offender. And that hurts us because they lose confidence in programs, they lose confidence in treatment. And so it really, we've got to get everybody kind of rise all the boats. If not, the bad ones are hurting the better programs. And the state will take care of some of that. You know, I mean, it sounds like they're kind of moving that way. All right, I'm tired. You guys tired? I did all the work. I don't know why the hell you're tired. But I got a little time. I'll answer questions now. I did most of the talking. I'm sorry about that. Yes?
How do you define change talk?
Change talk? Well, it's part of motivational interviewing, kind of, you know, getting them reflective listening and getting them to talk about where they want to be. And, you know, but it's not enough, right? Now you got to go, okay, we've identified what your goals are, right, where you want to be. Now, what's it going to take to get there? Let's practice a little bit. Let's work on that. You know, and part of it, I think, is what you saw. One of the reasons I like epics, because you saw motivational interviewing in there. Mindy said to him, "Is it okay if we do this and work?" She didn't deal with a lot of issues. She dealt with one. Here's what I like about that model versus groups. We're going to do groups and corrections. That's how we do business, right? But you know, if you've run groups, that there are guys sitting there thinking this doesn't belong, this doesn't apply to me, right? Or they're not paying attention, or, I mean, you can only do so much, right? With that model, it's about their problem. And about guy next to their's problem, it's about their problem. They can't hide. All right, they work on it. You can take into account responsivity one-on-one. You didn't get it? Let me show you that another way, right? That's harder to do in a group when you only got an hour and a half to run a group. The other thing is that they've got to have that ability to build those steps. If you saw Charles's plan was stay away from everybody. Bad plan, right? Bad plan, because he's not going to do that. He's a young guy. Eventually he's going to want to go out, right? Now, if I were Mindy, once I got this under control, I got to replace those friends with better friends, right? Charles has some things going for him. What's he have going for him? Got a job, but what else? Huh? Got a safe place, and who's he have? Yeah, mother, church lady, right? She doesn't approve of this stuff. That's an asset. Maybe you start working with mom now to identify some people that he can start going to some other places and doing some other things, maybe with involved in her church, right? Because now Mindy has to start working on replacing those friends with pro-social friends, right? And so she can build on it, but she didn't try to do everything at once. If she did, she might not get there. But yeah, change talk reinforces. I hear myself say it, I get up and I tell others, that reinforces the behavior, but it still only becomes talk. You have to go to those action. She didn't stop with the steps. She said, let's practice. What's that?
Sorry. What would the training look like in an organization on evidence-based practices, like providing staff?
Well, I think there's a couple different, there's a lot, if it's a program, how we do program design. Let me tell you how I do program design. If I'm going in and creating a new program or redesigning a program, usually we organize them into 4 subgroups. We have a group that looks at assessment. Now, assessment isn't just the assessment tool, it's intake. Who are you bringing in? What are the criteria? Who do you exclude? How do you reassess? So we have a group that's looking at the assessment process for the program, whatever the program is. Second group is looking at the behavioral management system, right? How are we going to reinforce, reward, sanction, right? And so every program has some type of behavioral management, maybe levels and what you have to do to earn levels and all that kind of stuff. We have them look at that. Is it working? Is it not working? Is it too complicated? Is it consistent? We guide them. The third group is the programming group. All right? They're looking at the curriculum. All right? What curriculums? Here are your options. What training's required, and so on and so forth. Then we have, and they do scheduling as well. So there's a dosage there and so forth. Then we might have a training group. All right? Now the training group may be part of the quality assurance group. So that group is responsible for getting training and quality assurance. You train them on how to monitor the program. All right? So those are kind of the 4 key areas. The training, though, has to involve, in my opinion, coaching as well. And I think here's the other mistake programs make. You adopt things that you can't build capacity. Example, you spend a lot of money buying a curriculum. You spend a lot of money getting trained. Every workbook costs you $30, and every time you bring in a trainer, it's however much money. So you do that, and then what happens a year from now? You're going to spend that money again? No. You're gonna watch me, right? So I always tell folks, pick things that they'll train trainers so that you can have the capacity to sustain whatever it is you're doing. If you're not big, get together as groups. You decide to use a curriculum, you're all gonna use it. Get people trained, get some trainers trained so that when she needs 2 new people trained and she needs 2 new people trained, they can do a training and you don't incur a lot of new costs. People make that mistake. They don't think about the capacity they're going to need 2 years from now or 3 years from now. Training, I can tell you how we do epics. It's not easy. It's a 3-day training. We train the supervisors. We do some separate training with the supervisors because they're the key. Actually, the first thing we do is we get the whole leadership on a video and go through all the things we're going to hear, right, from the officers. Right? I'm not a counselor. Where am I going to find the time to do this? I already do it, right? So we kind of go through and prepare them for how to get the staff ready. We train on site. When the officers feel that they're competent, they have to submit tapes. We listen to the tapes, we code the tapes, we do 5 video coaching sessions. The first 2 we run. The third one we run with the supervisors. The fourth one the supervisor runs, and the 5th one. Because what we want to do is transition from us being the coaches to them being the coaches. So the process might take a year. But when we're done, that agency should have a core of supervisors that now know how to sit in and listen to a group, review a tape, and then we'll train them as trainers if they want to be trained as trainers. So that's a very elaborate process for training. And for us, the place tips over because we train 30 officers at a time. Each submits 5 tapes. That's 150 tapes. I did 22 trainings last month. So hundreds of tapes are coming in, and I hire people to listen to them. Their ears bleed, they say, you know. But that's the only way we think we can get them. Others do it a little different, but we think that's the way to do it. Now with the COG groups, what we do is, I think those are, depends on the group, 3-4 day trainings. We train you on the material, then you do lots of teach backs. And what I've told my staff is that isn't enough. Now we add video coaching. So we don't even cut you loose. We video coach for a while. And then once you've done it a while, if you want to be a trainer, we'll bring you in and train you as a trainer. Then you're certified to train.
You've been doing some stuff with the National Implementation Research Network, right? Have you been doing some stuff with them? Yeah. So I have two questions for you. Where do you think that implementation research is in the corrections world today from kind of your perspective, and what are your takeaways from some of that work with NERN for corrections? Yeah.
Well, I think we're pretty good at identifying the barriers, the things that get in the way. There's actually, you know, Faye Taxman's done some work with surveys. We use some of her surveys to basically measure organizational responsivity. You know, is this an organization that is ready to adopt this, right? If it's not ready, then you've got to do other things before it even gets ready. The assumption is we can just go in, if we work hard enough, you'll get it. But there's some evidence now that organizations are kind of like, you know, the wheel of motivation, you know, they're pre-contemplative kind of thing. So there's some work done there, and we've done some of those. We do a lot of that pre-work if we're going to a big organization to see if they're ready. The barriers we've identified. I think that still the challenges around implementation are the same. The inconsistent leadership, the turnover in staff, the culture is very hard. That's very hard to change. I'm a big fan. My experience is don't try to do everything at once. I believe in, when I've worked in systems, I always tell them, let's pick a unit. If it's a system, let's pick a prison or pick a unit within a prison, or one piece. Let's do it. Let's do it well. We'll use that as our beta site. Once we've got the staff on board, the correctional, whoever it is, they start to sell it for you. Now you can rotate people in. But if you try to do everything at one time, all you'll do is put out fires, and you won't get it done. So I'm a big fan of chunking it out and doing it one at a time. In LA, for example, they got 17,000 inmates. How the hell am I going to do programs, right? We picked one facility, one unit, 200 inmates, right? We spent a lot of time. We tried to train the sheriff's staff. It was impossible. So they ended up using community college. They had a contract with community college. They were great. We trained them as facilitators. They were fantastic. They had the skills. So we gave up on training county people and let them contract out. But we did one unit. Now they're trying to expand it, go to scale. But had we tried to do that, I went out there once, I'll tell you a story. I went out to LA one time. LA is, people don't realize how big it is. I don't just mean population. Geographically, it's a massive county. You can drive 4 hours and you're still in LA. And they have what they call camps for delinquents. Most counties in California have a camp. LA has 21 camps. Each camp has 50 to 60 kids in it. These are kind of higher end delinquents. So they wanted to fix their camps. So they sent me to one. It's 3.5 hours outside of LA. They had 5 camps in the Constellation. It was named after the Challenger, the one that went down. So they had a kid take me around in a golf cart. And he said, you know, each one of the camps is named after one of the astronauts that died. He said, we're doomed to failure. Okay? And he was right. Okay? So I got back and I wrote a report. I met with them and they said, what do you think? I said, let's pick one camp. Let's go in, let's strip it down, train the staff, get it where it's a model program, then we can start bringing people in. And they said, that's a great idea, but we don't want to do that. We're going to do them all at once. Now, I just heard the other day they're shutting a bunch of them down because there's so many abuses. So they got nothing done. you know, and so in my opinion, it's a mistake to try to fix everything at one time. You got to start, you know, and we're doing prison work now in Ohio. We got 31 prisons, you know. I said, let's pick one unit on one prison and get it going, you know. Because if we can get traction going there, it's a lot easier. Once the COs in there buy in, then it gets a lot easier. But you try to do everything at once, all you're doing is fighting with them.
Isn't that what you're saying about the residents? That you do
Yeah.
that you work on one thing
Work.
for them at a time, because if you try and go at everything.
Try everything, you're not gonna get
So
anywhere.
It's like in church. You go to church, you hear the sermon or this lecture, and you're like, you go home, you're gonna change everything.
Change nothing.
You change nothing
Yeah.
because it's gonna just collapse.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not, I just, you know, it's just been my experience that, especially with them, and even with us, if we have too much to do, oftentimes what do? We shut down.
Shut down.
You know, or if we're smart, we get the one done, you know, and we go to the next one. But if we're not smart, we don't know where to go.
It's overwhelming.
It's overwhelming, and I think that can be true with correctional programs as well. So, you know, that's just my advice. I wouldn't try to fix it all at one time. Well, the LSI, I think the LSI, that now there's the LSCMI, so they have a new version. The LSI is the most researched instrument out there. When we developed the Ohio Risk Assessment System, let me tell you what my thinking was. There was a couple things. First of all, the state didn't want to buy a tool. They didn't want to pay for a tool. So the LSI was out. The other problem that I had seen from years of doing LSI work, and I'd probably published as much as anyone on it, I trained on it. The LSI is a great tool if you're in the community, or if you're coming into prison, right? You're coming into prison and I'm assessing you with the LSI. Tell me about your drug use, tell me about your criminal history, tell me where you've been living, tell me about this and this and this. No problem, easy. That's what it's designed for. You've been in prison 5 years. You're getting ready to get out. I'm going to assess you with the LSI. Where you been living? Who you been hanging around with? What, you using a lot of drugs? Right? Well, not much. Well, whatever you get your hand on, right? Right, because you don't have much access. How about, tell me about your job. You happy with your job, right? Yeah, what job, right? I mean, so I knew the problem was the tool wasn't designed to assess people at every stage of the game. And some states would like adopt it, they change the wording and all that. That was bullshit, right? So when we went into Ohio, we interviewed offenders at every different stage. The community supervision tool that we developed looks a lot like the LSI. The items come up. We had 2 reentry tools, one for long-term inmates, one for short-term inmates. The short-term, the guys who were only there for a short time, their risk factors were all still pretty dynamic. But the long-term guys, they only had 3 areas that were really big for them: criminal history, attitudes and personality traits, and social support. Everything else disappeared. So I knew that having one tool to try to assess people at every different level was a big mistake. But in terms of predictive ability and all that, LSI's still top of the heap. You know, we're getting a lot of use of our tool because it's free. You know, we give it to people. Some of them I don't like. You know, Compass, that's horse shit tool. You know, should be out of business. But all right, listen, I'm tired, and I think we're way done. And thank you. Mm-hmm.